Warning, the following podcast contains spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home. Viewer discretion is advised.
And now, your feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie conversation. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Oh, that's actually Uncle Eric.
Man, I'm so excited to do this. So yes, this is our Spider-Man No Way Home spoiler cast. So you probably saw a little warning at the beginning or heard a warning at the beginning of this video. We are going to completely spoil everything in this movie. So I just want to get that off right off the bat, give people time if they go, oh shit, I clicked on the wrong thing. I haven't seen the movie yet. I love it. And back out now because I really do think that you should experience this movie as spoiler free as possible. If you want a completely spoiler free review, we do have that. Head over to the Untitled Movie Reviews channel. We did 40 minutes of spoiler free conversation, which I've heard from people was a great conversation that did not spoil anything. So, which I'm very proud of when someone comes to us and says that. Because I think Eric and I very eloquently put our thoughts into a podcast without giving away anything that wasn't in the promotional material. But on this show, we're going to go all in. We're going to talk about every spoiler as it's out now in the UK as we're recording this. It's coming out in North America tomorrow night. So I'm hoping you're coming back after you've seen the movie and you're riding off that high that we did. And I'm so excited to talk to Eric about every little detail. We won't kind of retread what we thought about the movie. We both really, really, really loved it. And you can go back and listen to that other review if you want that. This, I just want to talk about, the biggest reveals, kind of where we think the franchise is going to go after this, and just kind of elaborate on some of the things we talked about in our review, but now can reference maybe something we were referencing, but had to kind of be, cheeky and dance around it in the normal review. So with that being said,
Can I kick it off?
Yeah, let's do. Okay.
In terms of a death,
spoilers are starting in 3, 2, 1 now. Where do you want to kick it off?
There's a death in this movie.
Yeah,
I just want to prompt it by saying it's gonna be May.
I mean, that's a huge thing. I think we got to kick it off. We'll get to that, Eric.
Yeah,
but I think
I just wanted to do that. I just thought of that. So.
I think the biggest thing is they did it. The other Spider-Mans are in the movie, and I mean, probably unsurprising to a lot of fans that are in the rumors and casting and reading about the MCU all the time,
or John Campia's website.
God damn it. We'll get into that too, but yeah, it's been out there for a while that they are in this movie. I'm so happy that Sony and Marvel Studios held back and let that reveal happen in the theater, even if a good amount of people who are hardcore fans probably knew that they were going to be in this movie. I love that they never officially confirmed it. Yes, if you were searching hard enough, you could find probably the majority of the spoilers for this movie. I thought something tumbled over. Okay, great. And so they're in it. You get Toby, you get Andrew. I'm wearing my Tick Tick Boom sweater to celebrate. And I mean, to kick it off there, what a sight and what an awesome thing to see is those three guys kind of interacting and their reveal, coming from Ned using a sling ring at his grandma's house and just Andrew walking through and then Toby walking through. I'm like, I can't wait to watch this with kind of a crowd, because I've already seen leaks happen on YouTube and things like that and people going nuts. And I really hope that it wasn't spoiled for you as you're listening to this, because as Eric and I mentioned, like, this movie, it feels like a celebration of not only just this character, which I think is probably the most popular superhero. Maybe Batman rivals him, and maybe I'm biased because those are the two heroes that I loved the most growing up. And Eric, I think you're in the same boat,
especially with Marvel. Like, I think Spider-Man is kind of the face of Marvel.
Ironically, he's owned by Sony,
Yeah.
which I think is amazing.
Well, I mean,
But
the Amazing Spider-Man's in this.
yeah. And then we talked about just that redemption element and seeing these three guys in this movie and being able to reference the past, but also focus on the present and then look towards the future. Like, this movie is so special of just being a celebration of Spider-Man and of superhero movies, and that whole last battle at the Statue of Liberty with the three Spider-Men going up against all these villains. So I know I'm all over the place, but I think that's the biggest thing of having those three, you know, the history of Spider-Man on film, essentially, those three guys, three different generations, all interacting with one another, all having their movies not necessarily feel like, oh, those don't matter anymore. Those are campy and old, those Sam Raimi movies. Like, they were of their time. They were fun, but like, we saw the origins of where superhero movies were going. But if you go back and watch them, they don't hold up to some people. And then you get to the Amazing Spider-Man movies and you're like, okay, Andrew Garfield was miscast. Those movies were messy and all over the place. They feel like they just were thrown together because Sony had to keep making Spider-Man movies to keep the rights. And, we saw 100 million reboots. And although Andrew Garfield, a great actor on paper, even sounds like a great Peter Parker, but then the route that they took it with this cool Peter, like,
Too
didn't
cool
vibe
for
with
school.
a lot of people. And then you have this version of Spider-Man in these three movies, which we already talked about, how this trilogy is, it's very hard to stick the landing, and that John Watts made three, it felt like completely unique, different tones, different feels movies. But then having those three generations come together and having Spider-Man Generations is like, it was so cool to just see those three guys interact and it feel like, I can't believe, like, you're watching it and you can't believe it's happening, but it actually works and they explain it. And it's because of the world building that the MCU's done over 10 years. You kind of buy into this multiverse thing, that they've been planting these seeds, and that you're totally okay with these, other Spider-Men coming in and all interacting with one another. So, um, it's wild. And I don't know what you want to take from that, Eric, or where you want to go from to talk about.
Well, just to mention as well, like, you mentioned, 10 years worth of MCU material, but then you also, on top of that, have almost 20 years of just, Spider-Man and Marvel. I mean, even the Statue of Liberty sequence is basically the final set piece in the first
From
X-Men
X-Men.
movie,
Yeah.
and sort of its reference. And then, going back to the Raimi Spider-Man movies, he came from a horror background as a director, and so his stuff kind of always was teetering on sort of genre with tone when it came to both slapstick and horror elements, especially in part two, where I think Raimi really found his footing, and was in complete control of the universe that he was creating with Tobey Maguire and with Alfred Molina. And obviously the third movie has a lot of problems, but it's also just interesting to look at the problems with those movies being embraced to some degree, with
Yeah.
Sandman being incorporated, but even with the Amazing Spider-Man movies, you
Which
have
which were a
Garfield.
failure. Let's, like, not dance
Yeah,
around it,
and
right?
and
Like,
Garfield was, and still is, I think, a huge fan of the character, and was so disappointed with where the Mark Webb movies went, and he's even been very candid about it in conversations afterwards. I remember there's this interview that keeps going around online that he did with Amy Adams, actor on actor at Variety, when he was talking about, or doing interviews for Hacksaw Ridge, and she was there for Arrival, and he talked about how it was basically just, to your point, Sony making those movies to keep the rights to them. There was no artistry or interest in sort of creating anything that was remotely character driven. It was just, basically consumer product first and foremost to.
and weirdly, it was kind of a rebuttal to the MCU, right? Like, they tried to kind of make a more MCU style kind of movie with the whole Peter's parents being spies and that whole weird subplot, and it just felt like they were trying to go, oh shit, we need to kind of adapt to what these movies are.
And not
And
even just that, you also had you know, at that point there was everything has to be dark.
Yeah.
Everything has to be the Dark Knight in terms of like that Christopher Nolan feel of realism, you know, the city streets, the grittiness of it all. And that doesn't translate with every single superhero character. It works for Batman obviously, but Spider-Man's not Batman. You know, as
But
much
this
as we
movie's
we
pretty
love them.
dark though.
Oh, it is, but it's dark in a kind of melancholy kind of
Yeah.
way, a sad kind of way.
Maybe
It's
not
not
brooding, but like
no, no, it's not. It's not intense in that kind of, you know, anguish.
it's more emotional
It's
or
more
just kind of
bittersweet than
yeah.
anything else. And I think like this is the first time I've liked Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. And again, you know, taking in what you know about the performance previously, but also what he's talked about, you know, in sort of how he felt about the role and the performance and those two movies as well. I think that this is the first film he actually got to play the version of Spider-Man he always wanted to play.
Mhm.
And you
And
can
I think
really
there are
feel that.
elements of those in those other movies, but this feels like he was fully able to embrace it. And same with Toby, like again, yeah, I think he's the weakest actor of the three. And but it was just so kind of nice to see him as this elder statesman kind of Spider-Man, right? Because you have kind of the three different age groups, it almost feels like Tom Holland still feels very young. Andrew Garfield, even when he was cast the first time, looked a little too old. And then Tobey Maguire almost looked too old when he was cast the first time too, and now looks even older. So I just think all of that works. All of their back and forth. I agree with you with the Andrew Garfield stuff. Like you saw bits and pieces of that, in the two Amazing movies, which I don't think are great. I don't mind the first one. The second one is just a trash fire, which is we'll get into Electro and stuff too, but.
They're going to say
Um,
Electro. I was like, we're talking about Daredevil as well? Because we kind of
I
are.
mean, we are that Matt Murdock shows up in the first like 20 minutes of the movie, which was wild. And he's in one scene. But a great week for Netflix Daredevil fans. I will say that. And going back to it, like those three guys and just feeling like they stepped right back into the costume and felt like they never missed a beat. And I know Garfield's movies weren't that long ago. And what I was saying, like there were bits and pieces where I'm like, man, he's so great that I feel like he did nail some of those emotional moments. It's just the writing. And I think the filmmaking kind of got in the way, and the way that they wrote that character, I feel like didn't completely work. But I feel like some of the times where he wasn't too cool, but he was just kind of awkward cool kind of thing, like or just like snarky but like not an asshole, when sometimes he was an asshole, so he just never fully got the grasp of the character through the writing. Where here I feel like they take the best elements of both the Raimi movies and the Amazing movies and incorporate that into this, final movie. And the movie never gets away from, Tom Holland's Spider-Man either, which I think was really impressive. Like there's so much in this movie. Like there's Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, the Lizard, Sandman, Venom shows up in the post-credit scenes.
And
Which we'll
only
get
the
to that.
post-credit scene.
I can't wait to talk about that scene because I literally yelled perfect at the end. Because I think that's just incredible what they did there. And I just I lost track of my point, but like I just think
There's
those three
just
guys.
so many working parts going
Right.
on within the film, right? But
Exactly.
John Watts and the writers Eric Summers and Chris McKenna are able to kind of keep everything going. And yeah, it is a long movie,
And
even.
make it about Tom Holland's Peter Parker
Yeah,
and not
but
necessarily.
also
But
but also
also
like his relationship to those who are closest to him. I mean, an obvious sort of indicator that you can tell that there's something going to happen to Aunt May. Whether or not you could predict that she was going to be killed off is another thing entirely. But because
because
she's
they
more
actually give her something to
central
do. Yeah.
to the
Yes,
storyline this time
exactly.
around,
Yeah.
and she's not just kind of like a side character that's bookending, the like the other
Yeah.
two movies, where like here she's actually prominently featured
And
and
has a storyline and, character
kind of
development. Yeah.
you see the influence that she has over Peter, and
Mhm.
sort of who Peter aspires to be, and even Happy Hogan, and also like the idea that both Ned and MJ are guilty by association, because this movie picks up exactly where Far
Yeah.
From Home left off. So
I think that's what we should do. Let's just kind of go through it in chronological order and
yeah.
talk about it. So keep going. Sorry.
But yeah, so basically you have Spider-Man's true identity is exposed and everybody knows who he is, and from that there are repercussions, and the repercussions are both from the public and media point of view, and then also from the point of view of law. He's cleared of any wrongdoing when it comes to legality through the help of Matt Murdock, played by Charlie Cox, who's brought back in to the MCU. So
My question there, so if we pause
yeah,
there, is do you think that this is the Netflix Daredevil version of, because I mean they do show him with his powers because he grabs the brick that's thrown through the window and there's a cheeky line, but or do you think that that's a multiverse story and then that Kingpin and that Daredevil is its own thing and this version is our MCU version? So the events of that show are canon or not canon, or well, I guess we'll just find out.
it's such a strange. I mean, ultimately we'll have to find out, and you don't want to make
I
some
bet you they
definitive.
keep it because if they're bringing in the actors from that show, and if you guys haven't watched Hawkeye this week, you should go watch it. I just feel like they must be like, yeah, everything in that, at least in Daredevil, maybe not Iron Fist and Jessica Jones quite yet, or
Luke Cage.
Luke Cage. But I guess they'll just kind of pick and choose. But
Right.
it was cool to see him pop up and finally, be brought into, this version of the MCU.
Yeah, but also like in terms of if he's a multiverse version or like
Just, what I mean by like, is this
right.
a new version of the character? Still maybe exactly the same, but did the events of the show take place, or is the Netflix
Is it
universe
canon or not?
a different universe essentially?
Right.
Because everything could be the exact same except the Netflix events didn't happen in this universe or whatever.
Yeah, because
But he's obviously, yeah.
we should also state that this character is a part of this universe before the multiverse break even happens. So,
yes, like
yeah.
he's just a character. Like
Yeah.
Aunt May references, says thanks, Matt, and like she seems like she had at least knew of him and things like that. So I don't know. Maybe it's the same Matt Murdock from the show. Maybe it's an alternate version of the same character, but like
Or a
it's
curated
just
version. Maybe
yeah.
maybe it's a little bit of the show
Column A,
version,
column
and
B, yeah.
yeah, and maybe he's going to be more sort of smoothed out to kind of fit within the MCU, and obviously like a big selling point of those Netflix series was that they were kind of like the harder R-rated version of Netflix.
Oh yeah, Kingpin smashes a dude's face in with the
Right.
door.
So like
right?
with
Like,
them joining the MCU, wherever they end up next, I don't think you're going to see them be that brutal. It's not that the MCU doesn't
they'll
have
be brutal.
darker
They just
moments,
don't
but
show the door hitting the person's head or blood splattering
yeah,
everywhere, right?
or
Like,
somebody being speared on a fence or things
yes,
like that. Like
exactly.
that, those are the things they'll kind of
They'll just do
probably
off
shy away
screen and
from. Yeah.
imply that they're happening, because the MCU can be brutal and violent, and even this movie goes to those places. But like,
But it's
I'll
it's never Punisher violent. Like that's the
No,
other
no, no,
thing
no,
as well.
no,
Like I'm
no.
thinking like John Bernthal's another guy
Oh
that they
God,
probably
yeah.
are thinking of bringing back in some capacity. And it's like, okay, how do you bring back the Punisher? Especially because also he's very much associated with Spider-Man as well.
So do you? My
Yeah.
question, maybe you go back to not Daredevil. I mean, yeah, but what they're gonna do with Deadpool? Like, is Deadpool gonna be branded a Marvel Studios 20th Century Fox movie? Like that's what I like, and be R-rated. And then when when fucking Deadpool
Darepool?
shows up in MCU crossovers, maybe he's PG-13, but when he's on his own, he's R. And I'm not saying Daredevil will go back to R-rated, maybe if he gets his own show or movie again, but I really just think Matt Murdock will be a guy kind of like the Hulk that probably just ends
Pops
up
in other
popping up in
ensemble
other
pieces.
things rather than getting his own show again. Like, I bet you the next time we see Matt Murdock is She-Hulk, and then
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if he has like a pretty prominent, or maybe not prominent, but a regular like guest role on that show, right?
Well,
Like,
depending on how much it takes place within the world of law, right, and in courtroom drama style which I
But
think
it
part
also
of it
might be in Los
is.
Angeles though, right? Because in the She-Hulk, the new logo that came up that looks like those kind of cable network or basic cable kind of
They'll
law
find a way,
shows or
Matt.
whatever.
They'll find a way where
That's
it's like,
true.
oh, we need to
Yeah.
bring in like an expert from New York to help out on
Yeah.
this or something like if they'll make it work, they'll write some jargon that's bullshit
Yeah.
in terms
And I
of
wonder
real
if there was
life, but
more with Matt Murdock that they cut out because there's just so much in this movie, like if there were court scenes or anything like that. But um yeah, a cool way to get Peter, out of the situation that he's in. But then that leads to, people who are associated with him also kind of coming down with him. So, it compromises May, it compromises MJ and Ned, and they're all kind of applying to college. And so
MIT.
the movie kind of skips ahead a little bit. So I loved how it opened because it was right at the end of Far From Home, and you kind of get this really intense like. And one thing I'll talk about is like the different vibes of the Spider-Man movies and just kind of the MCU Spider-Man as a whole, talking about the history. But like, the other movies have really fun openings. Like even after the events of Endgame and it being Far From Home being a follow-up of that movie, and you have major characters who died in that movie, and it's somber and things like that, but it starts in a very comedic way with the I Will Always Love You song and the montage from the school kids and stuff.
Well, the
In the
song
first
that they play when Spider-Man and MJ are swinging through the streets is a Talking Head song, and it's
Yeah.
very kind of peppy
Mhm.
and even though like it's kind of
Because
the
it's
swarm of,
chaotic a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I liked about it. And even the cinematography in that opening scene is like Peter's trying to figure out what's happening and he's taking MJ and they have to go through the sewers and he's trying to find a way out of there. And then I like that they kind of just skip a bit and go, okay, that's all done with now. Everyone knows he's Spider-Man. Matt Murdock got him out of criminal charges. The guy from Succession shows up as one of the uh, Department of Control or Cleanup and Control agents. He's in the last couple seasons of Succession. I got to get his name. I forget. Um, I'll find it in a bit. But I liked that cameo because we've been obsessed with Succession, and the season finale was just the other day. And then so they all get rejected from MIT, and then Peter starts to realize that like they got rejected from every school that they applied to, and because of their association with him, that their lives are also being ruined, which I think was kind of interesting. And like having them know about him right away and it kind of being a little bit of a, we talked about this in our review and had to dance around it, but like Spider-Man's always, yes, he worked with the Avengers, but he's been a solo superhero, right? And like
And
one thing of
not that he's antisocial either. It's
no,
just that he's worked alone, but he has been a team player. But when he works on his own or when he's trying to solve a problem to help somebody else, he never goes to the person and talks to them and says like,
he
"Hey,
tries to
like."
do everything himself.
Yeah, he takes it upon himself to basically shoulder
Almost because he
everybody
doesn't want
else's
to bother
problems.
anyone, right?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like that kind of thing of like trying to do it yourself, wanting to help everyone, but never wanting to ask for help.
But in
And then
doing
that's
that, that's like one of the things with this movie that I really like, that like it's partly about second chances and redemptions, but it's also really about him not being afraid to ask for help.
And that's one thing I have liked in the MCU that they've done is like the secret identity thing was, in the MCU not really a thing, right? And even on Spider-Man, like they got rid of that pretty quickly with, May finding out and then with Ned finding out right away in the first film, with MJ finding out in the second one. Like, and I know that's, in every Spider-Man movie, his girlfriend finds out and, and May either knows but doesn't know or does find out and things like that. His best friend always finds out, but I like them all teaming up in this kind of movie and being like, well, next Peter goes to Doctor Strange and something, I think after seeing this movie and talking with other people, you talk about all these things and then you almost forget Doctor Strange is in the movie. Like, I feel like everything you talk about is about the three Spider-Men and, the last battle and things like
He's
that,
almost a
where
plot device than anything else in
he
this
kind of
film.
is. So, and here's the kickoff to that is like Peter goes to Doctor Strange. I think this scene plays out so much better in the actual movie than it did in the trailer because I felt like in the trailer it was really, really clunky the way that they cut it to try to condense that conversation. And it was really weird where he's like, oh, I'm not going to do it. Wink, I am going to do it. And I think that whole sequence, even though the Scooby-Doo line still doesn't land, it's not a good joke.
No.
I think that whole conversation with Doctor Strange, finding out Wong is the Sorcerer Supreme, I think is really funny and really awesome
because of the 5-year blip.
Yeah, because of the blip and Doctor Strange blipped that Wong becomes Sorcerer Supreme, and he's still Sorcerer Supreme. So Doctor Strange is just kind of chilling there as Wong is this Sorcerer Supreme, which makes sense of why Wong showed up in Shang-Chi as well, right? In all of those sequences, and kind of had more control and feel like he was the guy leading the show there. So I think that was really, really cool. I still do think it's interesting that while I say I think that scene played out better here than it did in the trailer, because the trailer just seems like he was like, okay, I'll do it. Like,
well,
here,
people were even speculating, is Doctor Strange like somebody else? Like in the same way
Skrull
that like
or
Samuel
like
Jackson was a Skrull.
Where
Well, Nick Fury,
I think
not Samuel
yeah,
Samuel Jackson
sure.
was a Skrull.
And I don't know if you agree, but I think it plays out a little bit better here, where I still don't like the Doctor Strange stuff as a whole, especially at the end of the movie when we get there. I think, is the cheat code, the reboot point. But I feel like the MCU has earned it with how they've shown Doctor Strange's powers. If you think a little bit too hard about it all, you kind of go like, what are the extent of his powers? Like, what can he actually change and do and things like that? But it's magic. So you kind of just go, it's magic. You let him kind of do whatever he wants if he can cast the spell. But sorry,
well, also what the spell is or ultimately becomes. I think that's something I've been thinking about as well, because he says that people that knew who knew Spider-Man's true identity are being pulled into this universe.
Yeah.
And so you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, so why is it only these villains? Because, like, I mean, obviously there are reasons outside of the film that someone like James Franco as Harry's not going to be in this, but Harry knew back at the same time as Doc Ock.
But I think with the Venom scene, you could take it as, and why would Venom be pulled in? I guess because no, that doesn't make any sense. Why Venom would be pulled in?
I think that's just a thing where Sony and Marvel Studios just weren't on the same page.
No, and I love how that plays out, and we'll get there. And you're making good points, and I think that's one of my,
because even Topher Grace's Venom, right? He finds out that
oh, absolutely.
Peter
so like, and as we go on, I think we should talk about that, because I think that maybe is, talking about Doctor Strange right now, and even him agreeing to do this spell seems like, I know he might feel bad for Peter and what he's gone through, and they went through a lot in the events of Infinity War and Endgame, but like, it still seems like a stretch to me that Doctor Strange, I know it seems like a little bit of a stretch with the Doctor Strange who's kind of matured instead of, the pompous asshole at the beginning who thought he could do everything. But then maybe there's a little bit of that Stephen Strange still in there.
I still think he has a bit of an ego, and he's
and he knows, he thinks I can do it, right?
But also kind of like I think obviously him and Wong are friends, but I think there's like this kind of like,
that he's mad that he's not Sorcerer Supreme.
Well, not even that, but like Wong is like the authority figure now. So Wong says, "I don't know if you should do that. Just don't involve me. It's I'll show you. I'll do what I want."
Yeah. And I get that. Anyone who tells you not to do something, you're gonna go, "Fuck you! I am gonna do it."
And that's kind of, I mean, there. Even though, I agree with you as well that like Strange in his first movie does mature quite a bit in his origin story, but that doesn't mean that there aren't still impulses there that he's driven to compete against others and be number one and again show off to younger generations, and
he's the most powerful Avenger or something too, right? So I think that's really interesting. So Strange ends up doing this spell, and then as he's doing the spell, Peter kind of interjects 3 or 4 times, being like, because Doctor Strange goes, "Oh, I'm just going to erase the memory of everyone who knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man." And then Peter goes, "Well, I want May to know, and I want MJ to know, and I want Ned to know," and like, and kind of interjects a bunch of times, which fucks up Doctor Strange's spell, and ends up kind of breaking open the multiverse. And what we find out is basically it sucks in which they reference later, which Eric just mentioned. Anyone who knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man in any universe, it does really only pull in the people that they cast in the movie or they didn't bring back, or that they did bring back. So you get who I already mentioned, you get Otto Octavius, you get Green Goblin from the Raimi verse, you get Electro and the Lizard from the Amazing verse. Oh, and you get Sandman from the Raimi verse. So you get all three basically main villains.
It's me, Sandy Dennis.
Essentially, you get all 5 main villains from the other universes, right? And
Except
I guess maybe
for the Rhino.
Yeah, you don't get Rhino and you don't get Venom.
And you don't get Dane
DeHaan
DeHaan's Green Goblin
Green
either.
Goblin, yeah. So they do pick and choose, and you get the quote-unquote main villain, I would say, from each movie, right?
Yeah, and none of Holland's villains.
And none of Holland's villains even come back at all. Like, aren't
so
even
there's
referenced.
no Sinister Six.
Yeah, there's no Vulture, no Mysterio. I will talk about, did you notice Scorpion in the purple? Did you notice all the
I saw
Rhino,
and,
Rhino and Scorpion?
Rhino,
I saw it,
yeah.
and I saw the Scorpion from like the animated series or whatever outline
from like the 90s,
the 90s, and I thought that was really cool. We'll get there. Essentially, sucks in all these villains, but we don't know what happened at this point. Peter runs to the Queensboro Bridge to try to find the administrator for MIT, like the dean or something, I think.
Yeah, because he's trying to appeal the rejection, and Doctor Strange makes a good point saying, like, you can appeal this. You don't.
And he's like, you didn't fucking talk to anyone first. And then as a dumb kid, and I like that I really believe that this Peter Parker is in high school and stuff.
Even though he's extremely smart,
yeah,
he's still a teenager, and teenagers go from one extreme to another. And this is him being like,
it's almost that book smart versus street smart kind of thing.
Yeah, my world is ending, so I have to go with the most extreme solution I can possibly find.
Yeah, which I really, really love, right? So he goes to meet this vice dean or vice president or something to try to really get Ned and MJ into the school. And
again,
then
very selfless in terms of what he's
which
doing.
I think is great. And then you get the reveal of Doc Ock, which we've seen in the trailers. I think it plays out super dope in here.
Again.
It's like, I mean, probably the best Spider-Man villain, easily. And Alfred Molina, just the best. And then, like, even in this scene, I think I thought it looked good. I know we were worried about the CG and stuff.
There is a lot of cutting, though. I did notice that there's a lot. Later on, we'll talk a little bit more about Willem Dafoe, where I think it's quite noticeable with him in terms of the de-aging stuff. But I did notice in the introduction to Doc Ock, I mean, it's obviously an action scene as well, but it's cut in a way where it's not on the face a lot, and so the rapid cutting kind of keeps things moving and keeps you distracted from
fully CG Doc Ock, which we got a little bit in the Raimi movies from that building sequence, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of the action sequences in this maybe rival some of the most memorable of the franchise, but like they're all exciting and I think entertaining, and the choreography is a lot of fun, and especially when you get to the end when they all have to work together. But in this sequence, I think it's fun seeing this version of Peter Parker just being absolutely fucking confused and just fighting this guy who has, metal arms. And I did think that the nano suit, which I thought was cool, that Doc Ock takes basically Tony Stark's nano technology and puts it on his Doc Ock arms. And then it almost feels like they couldn't figure out a cool way to just, dispose of Doc Ock and get him captured in an interesting way, where they're just like, oh, well, Peter's suit could maybe technically control the arms if he took them. And then it feels very convenient and easy and almost anticlimactic. And I don't know if you felt the same when he's just like, I can control your arms now. And then
I actually thought that worked. I thought that was actually kind of funny. Like, that feels like
it is funny.
Tony would have been like, how's the
That's true.
easiest
That's a
way I
good
can
point.
combat my enemies? Okay, well,
And
if they
even the
have
back and forth with
technology,
him, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
just take over their suits.
Yeah.
You know?
That is a cool point. That is a good point of another throwback to the Iron Man franchise and how Tony Stark would deal with something. I just, to me, felt like a little convenient and
I,
easy to get out of that
it's
situation.
another cheat code, right? Like
Yeah,
it's like, okay, how do we kind of resolve this in a manner where we can get to the next plot
because
point?
we have to
Because
move pretty quickly through this because
yeah,
you
because
have
we
so
also have to
many.
bring in Green Goblin
Yeah,
for the first time as
yeah,
well.
and then yeah, to your point, Green Goblin comes in right after Peter kind of captures Doc Ock, um, and basically has a brief kind of interaction, but then is ripped out of there, um, and brought into the Wizard dungeon at Doctor Strange's place. Um, so after that,
And that's also where we're introduced to the Lizard as well, because Doctor
yes, Doctor
Strange,
Strange already fought him, right?
yes, and has caught Risa Fons' Lizard, who is also
Yes.
Rasputin in The Kingsman.
Yeah. So go check out our review of The Kingsman, where we talk about Reese, who I think is better as Rasputin than he is as the Lizard.
I mean, it's
Um,
mostly just CGI and him just giving a
Doing a
couple lines
voice.
of
Yeah.
dialogue, and I mean that's the same thing with Thomas Hayden Church, and it's also just funny to mention that even in the end credits, when you see all the names come up like individually of who's in it, they don't put Risa Fons or Thomas Hayden Church in
Oh, do
the
they not?
main. No, like
Because they're mostly CG characters, and then
yeah,
like
it's in
yeah.
the scroll, the
But they don't get
cast.
their own title card.
No,
They don't even get an and credit or anything,
no.
eh? Interesting. Um, so yeah, you get the Lizard is captured. They've captured Doc Ock. They're kind of in these chambers that Doctor Strange has in this dungeon. And then Doctor Strange reveals that Peter has to, or he tells him what we just told you guys, which is these villains from these different universes have been sucked in because they all know the identity of Peter Parker. So now Peter has to go capture all of these villains with this cool kind of Doctor Strange web slinger device that will capture the villains and put them into these
It's almost Power
cages.
Ranger-esque.
It was cool, man. Like he basically rips off his web shooter and then makes it into this mystical kind of Doctor Strange slinger thing, and then it just basically shoots a web, and when it or hits something, it brings them into one of these cages. Thought that was dope.
And then Doc Ock though also mentions that Norman is dead. Like, how could that be the Green Goblin? So that's like the first instance of where a main plot point of this story is going to be Spider-Man trying to help villains that have fought other Spider-Men in the past and have died in the process.
Died fighting him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Other than Sandman,
Who
who
just
didn't.
blew away.
Well, he did. Maybe he did die. You know, he
It's
blew
me,
away in
Flint
the.
Marko!
We'll get there, because that's coming up next. So Peter's suit, from a brief scene we saw earlier, someone threw like green neon paint on his suit, and he turns it inside out. So he's got the black and gold suit, which I thought was cool. All the wires exposed and stuff like that. He goes to find who he thinks is Green Goblin, because someone says they spotted a guy floating in the sky or whatever. He also gets Ned and MJ to come over to Doctor Strange's place.
And it's kind of, it's in the
help.
dungeon, but it's also kind of like a weird, like your parents' basement kind of setup
Yes,
as well.
exactly. So you have Ned and MJ down there who are kind of helping Peter. You get some interaction between the villains, like you mentioned. We didn't say that Doc Ock on the bridge realized that this wasn't his Peter Parker or the Peter Parker that he's used to. So he kind of is starting to understand what's happening. Eric mentioned that he says like these people are dead that you're trying to find. He obviously doesn't know anything about the Lizard at this point because he's from different universes. The Lizard's been pretty quiet other than just like being very lizardy. And then so
out.
Peter goes basically to this field where there's a lot of electrical lines, and you get the reveal of Electro, the return of Jamie Foxx as Electro. He starts off as blue. You get a little blue, like how he looked with the kind of blue electricity flowing through him right away. And then immediately, basically, when he's using the power lines here and sucks in all the power, he gets his body back, and then, which and looks completely different than what he did in
he's Jamie Foxx.
Yeah, they didn't go with his look from Amazing Spider-Man, and they kind of just you're like, oh, he's cool now because he's filled with electricity.
Yeah.
Sure. So anyways, Peter fights Electro, Sandman, kind of
Peter, it's me,
yeah.
Flint
We get this
Marko.
we get this moment Peter's about to fight Electro, and then the sand kind of starts going. You're like, oh shit, Sandman's coming, and then you just get this giant face, and it's like, Peter, it's me, Flint Marko, and you're like, great, that's how they're gonna do that. Okay, cool. It was funny. I laughed. And
Because
then,
also at the end of Spider-Man 3, when he kind of becomes dust in the wind,
sure.
like the Kansas song, Spider-Man and Sandman sort of parted on good terms
Yeah, so that's why I think he goes to him and helps him
at
initially.
first. Yeah.
But then he immediately kind of doesn't trust Peter after that, and then
You're
starts
not
to
my
attack him
Peter.
everywhere. So then they fight. Spider-Man captures them, right? Both of them,
Yeah,
or
and so
yeah,
Jamie Foxx's character is nude, so he finds
like a
a
fireman,
shack
or
of
yeah,
fireman
yeah,
suits and puts him in that and sends him to the wizard dungeon, where you have these characters interacting now, and obviously the lizard starts talking, and Electro Max Dillon knows who Dr. Connors
right.
is,
And then you're
and
starting to get some exposition of the villains figuring out that they're from each other's universes, but they're different than Doc Ock's
yeah.
one.
How'd you change? I fell into a vat of eels. Oh,
Yeah.
I fell into some sand.
Yeah, that's a
Careful where
great
you
moment.
fall.
And we will say, like, the humor, both the meta humor, the in jokes, like all of it, like it will get to a Norman Osborn one it's just a lob ball. Like, it's such an easy callback, but it's so funny. But yeah,
It's
you
also just
get
become a part of pop culture where it's kind
yeah.
of like you might as well go for that, because it's ridiculous in general, especially with some of these villains' origin stories where, like, yeah, a guy falls into a vat of eels and becomes electric, or a guy falls into a vat of sand and becomes Sandman. Like, it's
Yeah,
so
it's
silly.
stupid. So it's fun to point that stuff out while still being a very serious movie, and actually going back to that theme of redemption, which we'll get to in that final act. Like, even though it's very silly and their origins are very silly, like there is this redemptive thing of righting wrongs, or going back to the core of what the character or what the person was before they became this villain. So I think that was really interesting. Then we get some goblin stuff. So we see Gobby in the alleyway with he takes his mask off, and you get the old like talking to the mask kind of thing, which we got in the Raimi movies from Willem Dafoe. And then he smashes the goblin mask and kind of moves on. And then I think is the next scene, Peter goes to May because May calls him and says, one of the guys you're looking for is here. Right.
Yeah, and then we
And
also
then,
get stuff with J. Jonah Jameson, J.K. Simmons, kind of finding out that he's going to see his aunt at the homeless shelter. They get that tip, and then they kind of are like in hot pursuit of him as well.
mhm. So Feast, for people who are fans of the comics and more recently the Spider-Man video games, Feast is the like homeless shelter that Aunt May works at, is prominently featured in the Spider-Man video game. Also is run by a Spider-Man villain called Mr. Negative. So I don't know if that will come into play at some point, but thought that was
But it doesn't
interesting.
have to. That's the other thing about
Yeah.
this movie, is that
Yeah.
it's allowing for this universe not to have a Norman Osborn or a Doc Ock, and saying, okay, well, this is the John Watts, Tom Holland version of Spider-Man, and not everything has to kind of be directly ripped from the comic book. You can pick and choose things that work within the story you're telling, and that's why they're able to bring in these characters as well. Because I think that would have been that might have been interesting if they brought in somebody that was, you know, in both of the whether they were in the Raimi one or the Mark Webb one, and were also in the Holland one. But they've kind of been pretty good with going with new villains for each iteration.
Hmm.
But it might have been kind of interesting, but it's there. You don't really need it
And
because
because you
you
get that
have it with the
between the Spider,
Spider-Man.
yeah. So why take that away from them, right? Where I feel like that is actually a pretty smart move. So then you get, I think, where the movie kind of takes a turn for me in a good way, because I think at this point we've seen most of the footage from the trailers were in that first act of the movie. You get a little bit of that final fight where you see Lizard, Sandman, and Electro kind of fighting together. So you're kind of waiting for that if you've seen the trailers, but most of it was from that first act. So you get this sequence where Peter's running to Feast to try to see May because he thinks she's in danger. And then he gets there and Norman's just chilling in the shelter. I love that. Like, even though he's taken off of his suit, he's still wearing purple and green because you got to commit. You got to commit to the Goblin colors, which I absolutely love. And then you get just Norman seeking help from May. And then you're getting a little bit more kind of depth from, kind of the Goblin and Norman Osborn kind of character, where it's played very comic booky in, I think, the Raimi movies, and I love Dafoe in those movies because he's really, really animated and he's such a unique face and delivery and things like that. But I think one of the things we kind of touched on in our review, Eric, we said like this movie does such a great job, specifically I think with Goblin and Doc Ock. Like you can really tell that they focused on those two, and the other guys were kind of, there's seems like three kind of tiers. You get Electro kind of in that second tier, and then you kind of have Sandman and Lizard just kind of there
Yeah.
for the most part. How did you feel about because this is where the movie started to become a little unexpected to me. Like the next 40 minutes or so, I was like, oh wow, I did not expect the movie to kind of go this way.
I think that the way that they portray the duality of Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin here is a little bit more sensitive, and also kind of brings in a component of, somebody struggling with mental illness and kind of not being in the right mindset, but also, being displaced completely. And, for those that are homeless, struggling even more so. And I think that there's something there that is really interesting and sincere with the character development of Norman Osborn this time around, where I talked about it in the review. I always found Norman Osborn's sort of motivations and transformation into Green Goblin to kind of be lacking. And I felt like the kind of, character talking to themselves is a little bit cliched. And I've never been, I like, as much as I like Andy Serkis, I never was a big fan of
The
Gollum either,
Gollum, yeah,
doing the kind of back and forth as Schmeagol. So with this, I felt like they
showing kind of
actually,
schizophrenia in that kind of way and
yeah,
stuff.
and,
Yeah,
and again, like, to the point of view from like seeing it from somebody who is completely on their own, that's stripped of their wealth, is stripped of their resources, having to kind of fend for themselves and not knowing where to go, and it's very disorienting. And I think that there is a vulnerability there that isn't as cartoonish as Defoe has played it previously, even though there are very much kind of still big
yeah.
operatic moments. It just kind of felt a little refreshing to see something be taken a little bit more, not even seriously, but a little bit more thoughtful in
And
its portrayal.
yeah, and I think to your point with Aunt May in the movie as well, like having her, we saw a little bit of that in Far From Home when she's working for it's. I don't think she's working for Feast at that point. I think it's the United Way or something like that she's working for, where she does the not press conference thing, but like, oh, Spider-Man raising money for, people displaced after the snap. And then going to this and just seeing how she treats, Norman as he comes in and is asking for help. And I think that juxtaposition between how Doctor Strange is trying to deal with this problem after the events of Endgame, and how Peter, with the inspiration from May, I think that's really interesting, giving May just in that one sequence. Like, we don't need to see her working at the shelter a whole bunch and stuff like that, but even that one moment I think is enough to kind of catapult that character forward ultimately to where we get in this. And we'll talk about that and debate it when it happens, but like,
Well, he also trusts Peter. I think that's an
yes,
important thing to mention as well. That moment is where he feels safe enough to go with Peter, but then there's an interesting portrayal, not on, not the fault of Peter's, but of Doctor Strange putting somebody with a mental illness in a cage
yeah,
and just kind of like basically, assimilating him with the rest of the characters. So I
Yeah.
think that's even interesting.
Yeah. So the next scene, as Eric just mentioned, Norman trusts Peter and goes back to Doctor Strange's place, goes to the wizard dungeon, goes downstairs with him because Peter wants his help because he wants to help, fix these guys and not just send them off to their death. Or actually, he finds out about that now from Strange, but he brings Norman back. You get a great interaction from Norman and Doc Ock because they would know one another, but Doc Ock knows that Norman died years earlier in his universe and kind of mentions that to him. And then you get Electro and Lizard, and then this is where you get all the exposition, right, of that they're from different universes and they learn from one another and kind of understand that. And then at this point in my head, I'm like, oh, he's already captured all 5 of them. I'm like, and in my head, when like we know what this movie's about, I'm like, huh. Okay, like I remember that fight scene's coming because I've seen the trailers. But I'm like, this is interesting. I didn't expect at this point in the movie, which I can't even tell you how far into the movie it is because I was just so locked in. I didn't pay attention to like how long it took for them to do that. But I remember going, oh, this is pretty early and he's captured all 5 of them. And then what you just mentioned, Eric, Doctor Strange comes back. He's got this kind of, cube that he's going to trap them in essentially to send them back to their dimension. Is that what it is? I
Well, he
think
has
like,
the spell is in the
yeah.
cube. And
Right, because
so
he had to contain the spell, right?
yeah.
Yeah. And then he was going to take the villains, or he had to do something to send them back and ultimately get rid of the spell that he was trying to do because it was like halfway in, halfway out, and if it broke through, then everyone would come. Oh,
It's
I
basically
guess
like
that's
holding onto an atomic bomb, because
and,
if that cube with the spell explodes, it'll basically unleash multiverses galore.
right. And so I think that's the explanation that we were asking for earlier, is that he contained it in time, but just conveniently it's all the villains that we know that came through, which is fine.
And not all
I'm
the villains,
yeah,
just these guys
and the 2
specifically.
Spider-Men. So
Yeah.
and conveniently their Spider-Man also came through. So which is fine. Whatever, it's a superhero movie. So then you get Peter who goes, we don't want to send all of these guys back to their death. Like he sympathizes with them all because like he learns that Peter Parker or all of these villains died fighting Spider-Man. And that he is basically the reason, or an alternate version of him is the reason that these guys are all dead for the most part.
And there's probably
Um,
some residual guilt as well on Holland's Spider-Man's part because of Mysterio dying, even though it wasn't really his fault. He didn't want to kill Mysterio. It just kind of like,
that's a great point. Yeah.
yeah.
Because
And
he, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, because with Vulture, like one of the
That's
things he
exactly what I was,
does
is save him.
yeah, exactly.
And I think that is brilliant. Like that is great storytelling throughout 3 movies. Is like the first movie, he had a chance that he could have let Vulture die, right? He could have let him explode. And then I thought that was so wonderful in that movie because if you think of every Spider-Man movie we've gotten before this, other than Sandman, everyone basically dies, right? Like, so I thought that was refreshing in that first movie. And then to your point, in the second movie, where he ultimately doesn't want to kill Mysterio and Mysterio ends up killing himself, essentially, I think is so brilliant to then take that nugget and, to your point, use it as the crux of this movie. And like, and I never clicked into that. And that's such a great point, Eric, that like, that is ultimately why I think he goes like, I don't want to kill these guys. Like, I understand that they did some bad things and that was in another universe, but I just don't want to send them back to die. Like maybe we can help them. Maybe we can change them. And
And
you even
that's
see,
even interesting as well, because like there's this gray zone of like, are they really broken? Like,
Mhm.
like they're broken people in terms of like, morally, but it's like, okay, like, are they really, you know, do these people that are maybe like from Spider-Man's point of view, or society's point of view, do they, because it's almost like they treat them like they have these horrible disabilities or something like that. And I found that kind of
Mhm.
interesting as well, where
Mhm.
like it's actually kind of like contemplating, well, like what they have is something that wants, that everybody kind of wants to correct in this movie. I mean, obviously Peter specifically, but Aunt May being very encouraging to try to help them. But Green Goblin kind of has the counter argument of saying, like, there's nothing wrong with us,
Yeah.
we're fine.
And that's a great villain thing, and him being kind of the leader of these guys when we get to that heel turn again, um, I think is great. And I think that's what this movie does so great with all of these villains, is that they're all kind of sympathetic, and they were all trying to either improve themselves or help loved ones or something, and ended up becoming villains, right? Like Kurt Connors just wanted his fucking arm back.
Well, yeah,
Like
he wanted
Doc,
to create
yeah,
regeneration,
and
like,
do good, and then it corrupted him, right? Like
yeah.
Norman was a scientist. I don't know if he's necessarily trying to do anything good. That one, sure, but Doc Ock, even with his wife and trying to build the son and things like that, those are funny lines that they threw in it earlier too. But Sandman with his daughter, and then Electro just being kind of sympathetic of being, bullied, and
Just
now
wanting to be
he's
seen.
and be seen and have power, right? Like, and then so I like that heel turn later again too. So this is where the movie kind of takes a twist, where Doctor Strange wants to send them all back, and Peter goes, "Let me try to help them." And then Doctor Strange is like, "No, this is me now. Thank you
This is their
for
fate.
this is like, you might fuck things up even more if you do this. Like, we've already messed with the timeline enough during Endgame. Like, I'm just gonna send these fuckers back." And then Peter ends up stealing the wizard box from Doctor Strange, and essentially leads to a fight sequence, a Spider-Man versus Doctor Strange fight sequence through the Mirrorverse, and very similar, iconography and style that we got from the Doctor Strange
The Scott
movie.
Derrickson movie, yeah.
Yeah, so the Inception style city folding onto itself, a lot of the
Like
stuff
the
that we saw in the
kaleidoscope
trailers.
kind of
Yeah,
like vision of it all.
I ran to the bathroom at this point because I'm like, okay, I saw a lot of this in the trailers, so I kind of know that I'm safe. Because like what I was worried about, talking a Matt's bathroom minute, the movie being 2.5 hours, and we both got large cherry Cokes. I'm like, okay, I didn't have a 30-ounce coffee. I'm gonna try. I don't want to have to go to the bathroom 5 times during this movie. I need to pick one time to go. I gave myself one opportunity, one shot. Mom spaghetti.
I knew that was coming.
I was like, I gotta just go once because I have this large Coke. I ate some peanut butter cups and a hot dog. Like, I hope that just soaked everything in. So right when this scene started, I'm like, I know this is gonna be cool, but I don't even really love the Doctor Strange movie. So I'm like, I kind of know what I'm gonna get here. And did I miss anything cool, or was it pretty much what I
No, I mean,
thought?
basically what it boils down to is that
Because
there's
I
the
was
fight
pretty
between
quick,
the
but
two that is basically building up to Strange kind of exiting the picture, up until
mhm.
the end sort of fight sequence, and that Peter uses geometry to get out of the situation and figures a way out using math. So that's kind of
Which
like
I
the
think was
joke.
kind of cool,
Yeah.
yeah. They fight in the mirror dimension. There's a train. It's pretty cool, but yeah, it's a lot of the stuff you saw in Doctor Strange. And another element that was surprising to me is, and I think why people forget to talk about Doctor Strange that much in all of their reviews that I've kind of been reading and listening to, is that he kind of, to Eric's point, exits the movie at this point. Peter locks him in the mirror dimension, steals his sling ring, and then kind of leaves the mirror dimension using math, and then because he's good at geometry, and then goes back and frees all of the villains. Essentially, first he goes, "You guys got to trust me and listen to me. I'm going to try to help you. You got to come with me." Gives Ned the sling ring, I think, because Ned, there was a throwaway joke earlier in the movie that his family said that there's magic that runs in the family or
Yeah, because he
something.
has a
So
tingling in his hands, and then
yeah,
Doctor Strange says, you should see your physician."
yeah, which I thought was funny. Um,
That is one
so
thing, though, that I will say critically. I think some of the humor doesn't always work. It
yeah,
works much better here than Eternals or even Shang-Chi to a certain degree, but I think a lot of the stuff with like Flash Thompson this time around,
yep.
like him trying to like pitch his book, and also like that conflict of Flash not liking Peter but
And
liking
Flash getting into MIT,
Spider-Man.
like
Yeah.
all of that. I agree. I usually love the Flash Thompson stuff. Like Penis Parker, I think is really funny, and
Well,
just
the
like
first two
the
John
like,
Watts movies are very
yeah,
funny. Like there's
they
that
are,
one
yeah.
news break in the
Oh
like the
god.
cafeteria
And
that's
that's what you're kind
amazing.
of missing in this. Like I think a lot of when the three Spider-Men get together, like that stuff really works and I think is really funny, like the meta humor between all of them, that they're referencing their movies and referencing what they did and talking about their powers, and we'll get there. It's really really funny. Um but I agree with you. Like, I didn't like the Doctor Strange jokes. Like, anytime he tried to joke, I mentioned the Scooby Doo thing that was in the trailer and still does not work in the movie, even though they add shit instead of crap. Um, and yeah, a lot of the Flash Thompson stuff. When Peter goes back to the school, they bring in, the three teachers and the three comedians that we know, with Hannibal Buress,
JB Smoove
JB
and
Smoove,
Martin Starr.
Martin Starr, yeah. And I thought that scene didn't work at all either and was weird. Like I liked the weird Martin Starr jokes of like his wife leaving him during the blip or like faking her death and stuff, and like, or in the first movie just being, and
It's more
Hannibal
just an
Buress, the
obligation this time around,
yeah.
right? Like it almost feels sitcom-y where it's like you get those three actors in a scene and like if it were shot in front of a live studio audience, the crowd would be like, "Woo, yeah!"
They're back and they all have their one line or whatever. Like
Yeah.
Hannibal Buress is a conspiracy theorist and kind
But
of makes
that makes
like,
the most sense in
yeah,
terms of the three of them because in the first movie as the
when he
gym
calls
teacher,
Captain
Captain
America war
America a war
criminal.
criminal, which
Yeah.
I mean, he's
Uh,
not necessarily
yeah.
wrong.
But that's really funny where I just feel like the three of them in this just did not work. And I'm
No.
like, I like the sequence of Peter coming back to school and all the students like putting him on TikTok and like recording him and stuff because he's this giant celebrity and the most famous, kid in the world essentially.
But still poor. I
Um,
actually really like that as well.
and I love that that's just a through line of Peter Parker, is that he's always struggling to make money, right? Like, and I
Yeah.
think that's great. Like, he can be an Avenger, but he's still, Happy's not sharing any of. I mean, even Happy's not super wealthy. Like, it doesn't look like Tony left any money to any of them,
No. And I mean we saw that a little bit as well with Falcon and the Winter Soldier as well, where
where
like
they
just
kind of
because
criticize that, yeah.
yeah.
Which I think is interesting. Um, Anyways, getting back to it. So Peter releases all the villains and he's like, okay, you guys all have to come with me. And they drive in a feast van and they all go to Happy's apartment, which we didn't mention earlier. That's where May and Peter had to go live. I thought it was funny. All the New York Islanders memorabilia. You have the robot from the first Iron Man movie. Good callback. That's there. I just liked Happy's apartment. I thought that was funny.
Well,
Happy
I like
sleeping
when
with
all
the
three of them
CPAP
come in.
machine. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh
Hap Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say I like the idea of all these villains kind of hanging out with Spider-Man
Yes,
and coming into like
the
this house
apartment.
and just like again, it takes time to let these characters just hang out and interact with one another, and there's still going to be those kind of CGI heavy fight scenes, but there's enough sort of downtime
Without
before the
slowing down
major.
the movie either.
Yes, because like I was like I could watch a whole movie with these characters hanging out in Happy's apartment and just like
It's
shooting the shit, you
And
know.
that was what I mean by the most surprising element of the movie is, like, I felt like going into this movie, part of it's our job. Part of it is just we're online all the time. We see all the trailers, we read all the tweets, we see the rumors. We know you going into it. You're like, I kind of, how can they surprise me, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's like a holy shit moment in this that you're totally shocked that happened, but there were so many times where I'm like, this is not how I expected this movie to go. Like, I did not expect us to be in Happy Hogan's apartment with 5 out of the 6 members of the Sinister Six hanging out with Spider-Man and going, all right, try and fix us. Like, I was like, what? Like, and we're, a good hour and a bit into the movie at this point. You got no Tobey Maguire, no Andrew Garfield, and you're like, this is interesting. Like, this is not the route I expected. And to your great point earlier, Eric, like, it totally makes sense thinking about it, of going, of course this Spider-Man would go, hey, if I can talk to these guys and just try to help them, that's what I want to do. And I thought that was so cool. And I agree with you, just like seeing them hang out at this apartment, Peter getting to use his science abilities, which I feel like we haven't had a lot of slowdown moments where, you just get to see Peter not necessarily swing around and beat people up, like to actually go, I'm very, very smart, like his Tony Stark kind of element, like what Tony
He's a bit
saw
of a
in him.
scientist.
Yeah, God, we missed that line. Yeah, I'm a bit of a scientist myself. It's like it was so great, and
But I like that
especially.
interaction with especially with Norman and Peter, because obviously, like in the Raimi verse, Norman had a kind of bond or connection with Peter because of their love of science that kind of made Harry jealous, right? And here you're seeing a little bit more of that kind of like two great minds sort of meeting on the same
Mhm.
sort of plane and working together on something. And then also it's kind of interesting that like Doc Ock, even though he is, I think, the most sympathetic of all of them, is very irritable, and it's
Because
because
of
of the chip.
yeah.
But it's just interesting where like he's also the most skeptical of them, kind of like, oh, is this going to even work?
hmm Which I think is great. Like it's playing on the storylines of those original movies without even like incorporating those original actors. You're incorporating a completely new Spider-Man that's dealing with the same problems of those movies in a completely different way. And thought that was so cool and such a cool, awesome way to kind of take this. So you basically get them working on Doc Ock's chip, right? That was the first thing that they're going to tackle. And you have all these villains. You have Electro. He's going to get an arc react. No, sorry, not the arc reactor. The arc reactor is powering the thing that they're going to create the
He
new Doc
wants
Ock
the arc
chips.
reactor. He's
Yeah,
tempted by
because
the arc reactor.
they were going to put something on him that was
It'll basically absorb all the
suppresses
excess
electricity. Yeah,
energy. Like it'll take it out of him. Like Peter says, it'll take out the excess energy, but it won't take out the energy you need to survive, because the mind and the body functions
still
on
needs
energy.
electricity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're going to find all these different ways to help cure everyone, essentially.
I wish it was
Um,
scored to Hang In With the Boys.
Yeah, that would have been great. So then you get basically Norman and Peter. Eric, you already mentioned that there was a reveal that there's no Norman Osborn in this universe, which I
Yeah.
think is cool. Or there is, we just don't, no one knows of him yet, which I think could be an interesting route if you wanted to do an MCU version. Like
Right. But you
you,
don't have to either. Like that's the
no, I
other
don't
thing that
think you
this
would need
movie is
to,
also
but
kind of taking the stance. It's like not every version is going to be completely built
or they'll do their own
based on the
twist though. Yeah,
comics.
that's
Yeah.
what I mean. Like he could be instead of Harry being Peter's counterpart, you could have Norman be a similar age as Peter in this universe, right? And you could have them maybe grow up together. And maybe he meets him working later. We'll talk about that at the end where we think it's going to go. But I think that's really cool. Like they go, oh, who the fuck is Norman Osborn? Like I thought,
But now Peter knows some of this stuff from the
yeah.
other multiverse kind of.
But then that could be cool though. I think you could play with that where he's always just like, you know, worried about what could happen. Anyways,
Right.
and they tease Ned being Hobgoblin because that's a thing too. So they kind of poke fun at that. I don't know if it's here or later, but anyways, Norman and Peter work on the chip in Doc Ock's neck. They finish it. They put it into Doc Ock and it cures him. And there's this really wonderful moment where he finally has control of himself again. And I thought like that goes to that redemption and the second chances and ultimately, what he wanted in Spider-Man 2 and, the arms take control of him and do all these evil things. I just thought that was really, really great. And I think I was talking with some other people with like Tim Geddes of Kind of Funny and things like that. And the Goblin stuff, he and other people, some seem to think that it was just like Goblin faking the whole time, but I didn't see it that way. Like I thought it was Norman going back and forth because
Yeah,
this
because
is where you kind of
why
get,
would he turn Doc Ock back to who Doc
yeah,
Ock really
exactly.
is, right? If that was the case, because I do think that there are periods where he is Norman Osborn, and then there are periods where he's Green Goblin. Again, when somebody is suffering with either schizophrenia or something that is psychologically sort of
Hmm.
playing with the mind, there are moments of clarity where a person is more lucid, and then there are other times where they're completely gone. So I think,
Yeah.
again, like even with Doc Ock, like it's like you could look at that as like a way of like, this character is getting both therapy and the medication he needs to kind of be balanced again.
Yeah. But then you have that turn again where Goblin kind of takes over and right after they cure um, Doc Ock, and they were developing cures for the other villains. And then Goblin takes over and convinces Electro
Yeah, because
to
it's the
join him,
countdown
right?
on the charger
Yeah.
that he has that's taking out all the energy or the electricity.
Yeah, so essentially that's where we get that speech like I think you were saying, where there's nothing wrong with us, right?
Yeah,
Like we're
like
actually more powerful
he
now.
says
And
we're gods, that we
yeah.
take what we want.
Yeah. So that's kind of where you get the split of, them being villains again. So, even though Peter then has to work with Doc Ock kind of in that moment, and Doc Ock is almost like, because he has control and he's essentially a good guy again, because going back to your point of how Peter connected with Norman, he also did the same with Otto Octavius, in Spider-Man 2 before that kind of turn. So now that Otto is sort of a good guy at this point, I think is really interesting, and he kind of helps, but then as he, bursts through the building, he kind of runs away, and then everyone else escapes. Goblin and Peter have this really wild fight sequence that starts in Happy's apartment, um, and just this really cool superpower. And I always forget that Norman Osborn is superpowered, but he is, obviously, with these crazy flips, and they're fighting through the levels and the floors of the building.
Super
Um,
Norman Osborn.
yeah. I love that. He gets almost just as injured as Super Dave, but they fight through many floors of this building. I think there's some really, really cool choreography here that's outside of the building, on the balconies, inside through the levels of the building, and then ultimately you
It's
get
a
to the
lot of
bottom
property
floor.
damage.
Yeah. Um, which is one reason why people hate Spider-Man at this point. And which I love is just an ongoing thing too, of just the
And
Avengers in
Lizard, by the
general.
way, is in the
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 Feast van,
the feast fan, and then you also have J. Jonah Jameson and
who's
his
outside
crew kind
reporting.
of scoping the scene and basically slandering Spider-Man.
Yeah, great point. So, Lizard escapes. There's a funny line from J. Jonah Jameson. There's a fight between Goblin and Peter that goes all the way down to the bottom floor. A really intense fight back and forth. May is now there because she has come to try to help. Or was she always upstairs with him?
She Spider-Man or Peter tells May to run because he senses.
Yes,
So
because
there's
she
also a
comes
really
in
great
later,
camera
right?
shot that I don't normally like in movies because it's been used so much, and it's that one where they attach the camera to the actor and it's from their
And they
perspective,
like
where
run and
the
it kind of shows
Requiem
their
for a
face. Yeah.
Dream hangover.
Hangover. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it works
So,
for the spider sense kind of thing when Green
oh
Goblin
yes,
is
I
taking him
do. Yeah.
off.
It's on Peter's face, right?
Yeah.
As he's kind of, he knows something bad is about to happen. His Peter Tingle is in full force, which I think that's a great, with May giving the Peter Tingle the name, and like May coming in and him telling her to run.
And then
Um,
she takes the stairs all the way down.
yeah. And then you get the big moment where Peter's fighting Goblin. May tries to help Peter. Um, and then Goblin throws a pumpkin bomb, and Peter jumps and knocks it out of the way, injuring himself. And then I like that your name actually says Uncle Eric. I just
I
saw
know.
this down here. I just didn't know. Um, and then you get the a second Uncle Ben moment, but now as an Aunt May moment, where you realize that May has been injured and is about to die.
Well,
And
this is another criticism. There's two criticisms that I have with this.
how dare
One
you?
one where I think the CGI of the glider hitting her
Yeah,
looks a little clunky. If I were to say,
sure.
like, maybe like one thing like CGI wise that doesn't work. And also I think when you see Norman revert back to Green Goblin in the scene prior, upstairs in Happy's place, you can see the kind of plasticness of, because like Willem Dafoe is obviously very expressionistic and obviously a much older man than he was almost 20 years ago.
So they
So
did try to de-age both him and Alfred Molina to be like Raimi era, right?
yeah, and so there is something with like when he does the grin where like it looks very smooth on his face, and like the way that it's lit doesn't always really work.
Didn't bother
Uh,
me, but sure, yeah.
but no, it didn't bother me in the sense it's like it took me out of the movie, or I think the movie's bad because of it. But
Yeah,
you can tell, like,
sure.
there is something a little uncanny valley about that moment, but it's not as bad as, say, The Irishman, or
I agree.
even Robert Downey Jr.'s sort of younger Iron Man in Civil War, even though that's kind of a simulation and they can kind of get away with that a little bit more, but you can obviously tell.
Barf.
Yeah. um so
That's what it was called.
yeah. But going back to the Aunt May thing, I understand why maybe it's a little bit awkward, because they're kind of,
Trying to hide that
well,
she
they're
got
trying to
stabbed.
hide it, but also it's like, do they want, like, because like obviously when we think of the hang glider, we think of like him, like Norman Osborn being
Being
impaled.
impaled. That's what
And
I thought
again,
was going to happen.
there's the guilt of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man as well, probably feeling the same way and can relate to Holland with the Mysterio thing, because he didn't necessarily kill Norman Osborn. Not Norman Osborn killed himself in that first movie.
Yeah.
But that hang glider, it's like, well, do we really want to see Aunt May get impaled? So it's kind of like this, like,
It clips her, it stabs her, she hides it from him, and
yeah.
then you kind of get the Uncle Ben moment again.
And
And
this is the fatalism thing that I'm
yeah,
not the biggest fan of with blockbusters now, where it's like it has to be a definitive ending for a character
without
that is,
spoiling other movies, it's happened a lot lately. Yeah.
yeah, especially in blockbuster movies.
And I don't know how you, because I get that there needs to be stakes. I get that, and I'm kind of torn on it because I really like May's arc in this movie. Um, and I love Marisa Tomei so much. So it's just a bummer that, she's the one who had to kind of go. And I think she's so great as May. Um, and like, I am really happy we got even though we've heard it 100 million times at this point, the great power comes great responsibility. And I think it's very earned from that character. Um, to say it and not say this is something your uncle said or whatever. Like Aunt May is that person in this universe, and she always has been in Spider-Man. And Ben is great, and he was the catalyst to Spider-Man becoming Spider-Man and many other versions.
But
But
you could also argue Uncle Ben in Holland's universe is also Tony Stark.
and that's my biggest thing of why I'm kind of torn on it, because like especially when we get to the end of this movie, I'm like I'm really excited by the end, and we'll talk about that. But I'm like, this poor fucking kid, man. Like
Yeah,
he's
he's
gone through so much. Like from like Tony Stark essentially ruined this kid's life. Like if Tony Stark would have just left him alone, which is kind of the theme of the MCU.
well, Tony Stark created his
Yeah.
villains.
Yeah, and essentially he created this for Peter Parker, because like if he would have just left him alone and he kept being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, yes, you can't say that May wouldn't have died because the Rhino or whoever these smaller villains would have been that he would have fought as just a normal version of Spider-Man. But um yeah, I'm a little torn on it because like I love the with great power comes great responsibility. We finally get that. I think it's a really emotional moment. I do think it's mostly earned. But I am with you that I'm just like, did we need this in this movie? I'm like, was there a more interesting way of getting, to where we needed to go in that final act? Like, I know you needed to give Peter something, Tom Holland's Peter, something personal to, attach him to, these villains, like, other than just trying to cure them. Like, I get that why they put that in there. I just don't necessarily know what else they would have done. Like, is it a different character you kill off? To your point, Eric, that just seems like the not necessarily the easy way out, but seems to be a trend of going, well, we need some emotional weight in this movie. Let's kill off a character that people love.
And also to hang
Um,
it on Green Goblin as the one being responsible, it also kind of sort of takes away a little bit of like that quality of the mental illness thing, where it's like, okay, well, it's like the person that's going to do it is the guy who has the mental illness. It's like it's so easy to blame that person instead of
yeah.
like somebody that's
And
of
she was the one who
sound
tried to
mind.
help him and
Yeah.
and stuff too, right? And I mean, I get that from a storytelling standpoint. So you have that great moment at the end where he chooses not to kill him, but like, um, yeah, I don't know what other route you take. Like to me, I'm like, this kid's lost enough. He had his Uncle Ben moment with Tony. I would have even loved Tony to say the great power comes great responsibility line in Endgame. But maybe that's because it's not a Spider-Man movie. Maybe you don't put that in there. Maybe it doesn't make sense coming from Tony Stark. But like, um, their relationship was Uncle Ben and Peter to me. And then I love May and I love that character in these three movies. But like, and I love that she was the one who got to say it. I just, yeah, I don't know. I'm mixed on them killing her off. I ultimately think it works, and I think it,
Well, it has to, for where
yeah,
the final act goes, and the final sacrifice of Tom
yeah,
Holland's Spider-Man and what that
hmm
is. And so
yeah,
like in terms of like where it could go next, because if he's, I mean, again, it is also very nihilistic in a way where it's like he truly is on his own in every
yeah.
capacity
And
whatsoever.
it's really depressing if you
Yeah.
think about it. And like, I do really feel for this character throughout the whole every MCU movie he's been in, because I just feel like he's lost so much and he has to live with it all, and he doesn't have anyone he can share it with. And like, it's that's a lot. And I can't wait till we get through the plot and we'll talk about where we think it goes next. But I do think the May thing is necessary, or because I just don't know. You're not going to do it to MJ again because, they've done that with Gwen. And I mean, they never did it in the original trilogy. And I like where we haven't even gotten the original Spider-Man yet in our plot synopsis, but like, we're getting there. So anyways, I'm mixed on the May thing, but, and I think you're in the same boat,
Yeah,
even more
I just
so,
think
but
it's I get where they're going for, or what they're doing from like a story standpoint and how it works with that character. It's just, again, he's been through the ringer already, and it's just like
did you
even
need to give this kid a break?
yeah, like
Like,
even when you have Toby Maguire and Andrew Garfield kind of like comforting him a little bit and saying, my Uncle Ben died, and I lost somebody too. And then Garfield is also another character as well, who, when you look at those two
right, he
movies,
lost Ben and Gwen, right?
he and his parents.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it's
Which
like,
I guess all of these Peters did lose their parents. Like, that's one
yeah,
thing
but
that we're
but
like,
you always got the sense that Peter really
I didn't
didn't
even think of
have.
that though, because like that's another thing on this Peter Parker that we haven't touched on, because he probably did lose Uncle Ben. Maybe it was before May, maybe before he came into May's life. Like maybe this
Yeah.
version of Ben already died before Peter came into May's life. But Peter's parents are somewhere. They either died, or maybe he was just in this version just given up for adoption right away to the aunt. I don't know, but like,
Yeah, or maybe he never
um,
knew them, because that's the sense that you got even with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, that like his parents were, Aunt May and Uncle Ben. And then when
yeah,
Uncle Ben dies, that's just basically
his
losing his
dad died.
dad,
Yeah, totally.
And with the Andrew Garfield character, it's like he not only loses his parents, he loses Uncle Ben, and then he loses Gwen, and you're just
Yeah,
kind of like,
but at
wow, like
least
that is
he,
so bleak.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, and I think it goes even
It's
bleaker
bleaker
for
than
Tom.
Nightmare Alley.
Yeah, and even I think Tom Holland's is pretty bleak too, but is optimistic but bleak. But um okay, and then now we finally, in a moment that's not how I was expecting them to be introduced in the movie. You have Ned and MJ at Ned's grandma's house.
Yeah.
And then Ned and MJ haven't heard from Peter in a while. They've seeing stuff on the news from Happy's apartment. They're worried about him. Ned has this sling ring, and he noticed being like, "Oh, I wish we could just see where Peter was." And then he notices that a portal opens briefly, and then he tries to use the sling ring, and Ned is able to conjure a portal to reveal Peter Parker. And I thought they did a really good job here of, like, you see Peter in the distance in his Spider-Man outfit, and you know what's about to happen if you know what's about to happen. Um, but I think it was a really fun moment, and I cannot wait to watch this with a public audience, because people are just, even though a lot of people know that they're in it, people will still lose their minds. It's Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man who pops in costume, pulls off his mask. It's Andrew Garfield, and you're like, they did it. They're in this movie, and we still have like an hour left. And they have a really good back and forth with Ned and MJ. I think it's very funny. I think it's I don't know, a great reintroduction to the character where it still feels very much like that version of Spider-Man. But to your point, Eric, like it feels like it's honed in a bit more and less, you know, less I'm too cool for everything and more actually Peter
There's a
Parker.
direction for this version now that there really wasn't with the Mark Webb one. And you can also tell that I think Garfield really loves the material and is engaged by it, and it feels like because of that he's more kind of connected now and enthused to be back. I'm very curious to like, I'm sure there'll be an interview down the line where he talks about like what kind of won him over, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was just the way that the script kind of brings a kind of bittersweet quality to this character now, who we learned that after the
Gwen
events
died.
of Gwen dying, that he kind of went on this kind of dark streak, which isn't necessarily surprising, but it's just interesting that like, you know, these characters had a life out
A
after
history after,
their
yeah.
two, you know, Garfield's two movies and then Toby Maguire's three
Who we get,
films.
let's bring him in right now. So
Yeah.
then they do it again after this cute scene with Andrew Garfield because they're trying to still find their Peter. And then you have Toby Maguire walk in street clothes. And then it's just like, holy shit, this is amazing. And then you have some great back and forth between everyone. And yeah, this is a little bit jumping ahead, but yeah, to your point, Eric, like I love what the movie did with giving us essentially sequel material from those franchises by talking about yeah, like, and it makes sense for Andrew's version of Spider-Man that he was a bit more brooding and he was, you know, of all the things we talked about, that he would go down a dark path. And he talks about, I stopped pulling my punches, which is like, oh shit, like what did you do? um and then Toby talks about how he reconciles with MJ and that, you know, he's working on it and
Which
like,
is almost
you
kind
know,
of like Peter B. Parker from
yes,
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
exactly. And so essentially they talk with these two Spider-Men, realize what's happening. They say that they need to go and help this version of Peter, the MCU version of Peter. So they go, is there somewhere he would go to feel comfortable? And they go, is it the top of the school that they're at? Though, is that where it is,
I
or is
think
it just
so.
another building? I think it's the top of the school because he goes there earlier with MJ and is like, it's finally somewhere he can escape where it's quiet. So he goes there. He's a wreck because May just died. You get MJ and Ned go up to him and he's like, we have some people who want to talk to you. And Peter's originally, sorry, I'm saying Peter. So Tom Hall, I'm just going to call them by their actors' names because I feel like that's easier.
Yeah.
Tom Holland is like, I don't want to fucking talk to these people. And like, and then you get this really cool shot where it pans up and kind of on the bell tower kind of thing. You have the two Spider-Men like perched up there in the shadows and they jump down. And then you get the first interaction between the three generations of Spider-Man. And then to your point, Eric, like there's some really nice moments here where they each talk about their loss and what they've gone through and how they can connect with one another because they're all Peter Parker. Um, and this is where you're starting to get that celebration of Peter Parker, the character, and Spider-Man, the character.
And the
That
psychology of him, because
yeah,
again, you know, with the loss of Uncle Ben in both of the previous iterations, and then now with May, like that's the catalyst to make Spider-Man kind of change his ways. But also, again, talking about guilt and remorse, he always lived with the fact that he blamed himself for Uncle Ben's death. Like if he, you know, had stopped that one criminal from, you know, getting away, Uncle Ben would still be alive. So for the rest of his life, no matter how many good deeds he does, he's always going to have that.
I think
And
he
that's
feels that way with May here too, right?
exactly. And
Yeah.
so these two guys who have lived with it longer, even though, you know, time heals all wounds, you still live with the scars that you have, are able to sort of relate to him and empathize with him in a way that obviously he's not aware yet, because he did, because again, to your point that we mentioned, that he doesn't really have an Uncle Ben in his life. The Uncle Ben, the closest thing was Tony.
Yeah, and it's not a one-to-one match. Like we just think thematically Tony makes sense as the Uncle Ben style character. And I like that they subvert your expectations with the May thing. And even with the end of this movie, skipping ahead, this weirdly, again, talking about the celebration of Spider-Man movies, and we've kind of poked fun that, like, do we need to see Uncle Ben die again? Do we need, like, another Spider-Man origin story? Like, this is weirdly the MCU Spider-Man origin story in
Yeah.
movie number 3, which is wild, and I get chills talking about it. And I think the ending is so fucking cool, even if it's a little bit of a cheat code from Doctor Strange, and a reboot point. But like, it is such a perfect way of going, okay, we did our MCU version of Spider-Man. We've had enough time from the other versions. Let's see how we can kind of move forward with that. We will get to that, but essentially, the 3 Spider-Men, after sharing these stories with one another, like, they convince Tom Holland that, you need to keep going for May, right? Like, you need to do this for her. And he doesn't go down a dark path like the other guys did, because they didn't have one another like he has them in this moment, which I think is really cool, right? And they share that stuff with him, where, the normal Spider-Man origin is that they're so taken aback by Uncle Ben that, Tobey Maguire talks about that he killed the dude that he, thought killed Uncle Ben, but really was Sandman. Um,
It's me, Flint Marko.
I killed your uncle, but we're friends now.
But that retconning is, like, also kind of interesting as well to think about in Spider-Man 3, because, like, that was one of the things that bothered me the most about that movie. Not
Yeah,
emo Spider-Man, not Topher Grace's
Venom.
Venom, but like, it took
And Sandman's one of the best parts of that movie.
yeah, it just took away from the power and the emotion of Uncle Ben's death, and it kind of felt like
Made it a
everything
plot
was
device instead
well,
of
a plot device, but that everything is kind of like interconnected. Like, it just wasn't just a
you didn't
random
need it.
act of
Yeah,
violence.
yeah, you didn't need that.
No.
So they convince him to fight and that they will help him. So we get another cool hangout science moment where they all go back to, I forget where this is.
I
Where
think
they're
it's the
doing this.
school.
It's the school in the science lab,
Yeah.
right? Like, so they go into the school, into the science lab, and then you get the 3 Peter Parkers working together with Ned and MJ, each taking their own kind of villains to focus on to try to make the cures, because they still want to help these villains. Like, Peter
A
talks
cure
to
for
them.
wellness.
I keep saying Peter, which is another joke in the movie that they do over and over again, which is very funny. And in these sequences, what a delight to just watch these guys kind of hang out and be science bros together, all being Peter Parker, but all being very unique. Like, again, all having a different vibe while feeling like the same character. Like, I feel like the best elements of the Andrew Garfield character come out, the best ones of the Tobey Maguire one come out, and he's even adapted. And he's a little older and he's a little bit more quiet and he's not as kind of geeky as he was and things like that. But like, you
Not a
get some
lot of
great,
Toby face.
yeah. And then you get some great moments of them. Is this where the organic web stuff comes out? Like, where,
Yeah, where they talk
yeah,
about, because Tobey Maguire, like, that was always one of the most interesting things about the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, is that
is
the
that
web
choice?
isn't developed in a lab; it's actually organic and part of his body.
Yeah, and there's some great jokes there. Like, is that the only place it comes out? Like, is great. And like, just them going, ugh, like, you just make that in your body. I think that shit is so funny, and just hearing them kind of talk about, back and forth, and like, kind of Andrew's being the cool version of Peter Parker, and Tobey
It's
Maguire
talking
looking like,
shop, right?
yeah, Tobey Maguire. There's a great joke by Andrew Garfield where he calls him a youth pastor, which I laughed really, really hard
Well,
at.
it's also funny thinking as well, because like, I could see Tobey Maguire sort of negotiating in his contract. It's like, I don't really want to wear the suit for the
That
majority
much, yeah,
of the film. Can you just have me like wear
in a
plain
hoodie.
clothes? Where
Like,
Garfield and Holland,
yeah,
in their scenes together, are all both of those guys are wearing the suit.
yeah.
Where Tobey Maguire, I feel like the stipulation
They do
there
put on
was,
like other clothes. Like, Andrew Garfield puts on a lab coat when they're in there, but he's got his Spider-Man suit under.
yeah,
And
where
then
I
you
feel
have
Tobey Maguire is like, yeah, for the, like, I'll wear it for like maybe like
the
10%
final
of the
scene,
movie.
yeah, the final sequences, but don't make me wear it, for the rest of it. So that great science sequence is awesome. And then they head over to lure everyone to the Statue of Liberty, going back to the X-Men reference, and we see that the Statue of Liberty is being repaired, and they're putting a Captain America shield on the Statue of Liberty. And then Ned and MJ stay back at the school while the three Spider-Men go to fight Sandman, Doc Ock, no, not Doc Ock, Lizard, and Electro. And
Well,
then
that is another
Goblin.
thing that's a little bit weird with the handling of Doc Ock after he's been cured, because he kind of runs off as well
Yeah.
when the police and everything kind of goes south. And then, like, when he does come back, for a minute there's that kind of fake out. It's like, oh, he's working with the villains again, but he's not. And it's like, okay, well, like, why didn't he try to find Spider-Man again and like try to
Yeah.
help? Because, like, again, like, he at that point
There is that
was
one moment
cured.
everyone thinks he's a villain still, and like he had
Yeah,
to
that's what I was
probably,
mentioning.
yeah. So that's how I took it, because the J. Jonah Jameson kind of newscast that's, I guess that's the easy way to explain that. Um so then you get this the big final act fight scene, which confirms some of that trailer footage was doctored to remove the other two Spider-Men, because everyone's like, wow, Lizard's neck gets snapped the other way and by an invisible kick or punch. Yes, that was Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man that kicks him or punches him. And then you kind of get that first sequence where they're all fighting and they don't know how to work together, because to our point earlier, Peter Parker usually as Spider-Man does not work with other Spider-Men. So they don't really know how to work well together. But then they kind of take a timeout as they're fighting, and kind of go, okay, we need to be better at this. And then they kind of get on the same page. I forget what they change, but they go, I like the Peter 1, Peter 2, Peter 3 gag too. And then I think is really funny.
They regroup, and kind of like their tactic is to focus on one villain at a time.
Yes, at a time. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I do like calling Garfield Peter 3, I think is really funny. We before this fight, when they're all in their Spider-Man costumes, we get another great moment of them all talking together and like uh calling Andrew Garfield you're amazing, man. You're amazing. Don't ever forget that. Like and he's like, thanks, guys. And like, no. And like just those comments back and forth. They talk about the web shooters again, I think, and then they kind of call back to a few other things. Oh, this is when you get the funny villain talk of being like they're just waiting for the villains to come to the Statue of Liberty because they lured them there. And then so they're just kind of all waiting there, and I forget who says it. It might be Tom Holland, because he's a kid, right? And he's
He
curious.
talks about going to space,
And
right, and fighting.
yeah, because he goes, "Do you guys fight any cool villains in your universe? Because I fought an alien both like on Earth and in space,
and I teamed up with the Avengers."
Yeah, and the Avengers, and they're like, "Oh, the Avengers? What is that?" And I thought that
Is it
was
a
really
band?
funny. Yeah, I thought that was funny. And then you get the fun little conversation of them talking to them and going, "Oh, I fought an alien once too, but he was black and goopy or whatever." And like, and then you get Andrew Garfield being like, "I fought a Russian dude in like a rhino suit," and like, which I thought was really great, and like kind of poking fun at the villains that they fought in their universes that aren't in this movie. I think that was great. Then you get this fight sequence where they then have to work together. They focus on one villain at a time. Doc Ock comes back. There's a great moment between Doc Ock and Peter, which Eric, I think you really love this moment, right?
Yeah, so after the villains have been essentially cured, and including Norman Osborn, who kind of has like the big kind of like
So they
fight.
did kind of, that's after or no?
I think it's after, because
Okay, we can keep,
it's like when the
yeah.
dust settles and like everything's clear,
Sure.
then like Doc
We don't have
Ock.
to focus too much on the other stuff. They do
Right,
just, they
yeah.
go and cure everyone except for Goblin.
Yeah, and Doc Ock kind of looks at Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker and basically says like, Peter, you grew up, like, because the last time Doc Ock saw him was when he drowned, and since then Tobey Maguire and Peter Parker, this version of Peter Parker, have grown, and they're
Yeah.
like, and now
he's that version of Doc Ock that was still very friendly with Peter, as I was mentioning when they were like doing science experiments and he was interning for him, right? There's like great dinner sequence and stuff like that in Spider-Man 2. Yeah, I think that was a really great moment. You get Electro and Andrew Garfield's version getting that kind of moment, because again, he was kind to Max before Max became Electro, and I thought like those moments where Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man was interacting with a kid or someone that he kind of sympathized with, I thought he was actually quite good in those other Spider-Man movies. And that comes out even more here, where he feels more sympathetic and just kind of like connects to them on like a human level. And I thought like when Electro is finally taken down, like there's a great moment between, Andrew Garfield, and like that's what we mean by redemption and second chances. Like it was so cool to see each one of them interact with their villains in, a way that's not where you have to die, it's me or you kind of thing, right? Like
Or you
this
leave me
movie.
no choice.
Yeah, so this movie does such a great job of giving those moments to each one of the Spider-Men and the villains from those movies. So, yeah, with the Lizard, with Doc Ock, with Sandman, even you get those moments, and then it all leads to um, I should say Ned and MJ can't close a portal. MJ comes through because the Lizard chases after her. She falls a lot like MJ or Gwen Stacy falls in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. We see this moment in the trailer. Tom Holland goes to jump to grab MJ. He's tackled by the Lizard, I think, or Goblin. I forget.
One of the two, yeah.
One of the two takes him. And then it's so obvious, um, but I think it's done so perfectly because I do think the Gwen Stacy death is really really impactful, and as much as I don't like that second movie, like and it's corny with the hand on the web going out to try to grab her, but I think Garfield's performance and just the chemistry that they had in those two movies, I think really carry that moment, and it is super emotional, I feel like, even though I think that second movie is a trash fire. So it's such a cheap moment that um you know Holland can't save MJ and you think she's going to die just like Gwen did. And then you see Andrew Garfield start to go and you know exactly what they're doing. And it is kind of cheap, but like, I think it's fan servicey for a movie that's not very good and a franchise that was never good. But this is about the redemption stuff we keep talking about. Or I'm like, they're giving these characters to right the wrongs or change things in a different kind of way, but in this universe. And to have Andrew Garfield go down and grab MJ and stop and catch her and say, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And she's okay. And then him breaking down, I think is like such a fucking good moment. Like and that's coming from someone who I don't even really like the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I think the saving grace for those is the chemistry between, Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield, and he's charismatic and she's charismatic. And I just think that moment is just fantastic. It's fan servicey to the 100th degree, but like, I think it's super, well done and earned. Then finally we get, all the villains have been cured. You get the final kind of showdown between Goblin and Tom Holland's Peter Parker, while Tobey Maguire was dealing with Sandman, I think, or Doc Ock. Those moments that you're talking about, I think
he was no, because Sandman was the first person that they cured,
right?
So
okay.
It would have probably been Lizard. No, Lizard was second.
I thought Tobey was maybe with Doc Ock, and he comes over after or something, right?
Yeah.
Because Tom Holland is beating the shit out of Goblin at this point. Like they're fighting on the shield that's fallen into the water, right?
Yeah.
I think,
which is a really good sort of like production
set
design,
piece. Yeah.
piece,
Yeah. And it's just a brutal fight. Like you get that, that post Uncle Ben moment and this post Aunt May moment where, Spider-Man is enraged and he's going to kill the guy that killed, Aunt May in this. And like, he is absolutely like probably the most brutal we've seen the Tom Holland Spider-Man be, and just Spider-Man in general. Like he is beating the shit out of Goblin at this point, and you see the other two Spider-Man kind of looking down on him, and it's going back to the stuff they talked about earlier of that, they regret some of the things that they did, and you'll regret it if you do that. But it just kind of overtakes Tom Holland, and he's about to kill Goblin with the glider. And then Tobey Maguire's, rights the wrong of, the first Spider-Man movie and comes down and saves Norman's life by stopping, which again, all of these moments on paper sound, or like when you're talking about them, sound so obvious, but it's not how I would have even thought this movie was going to go in this redemptive kind of arc. So he stops the glider, and then you get a moment which I was also worried about, that you kind of get the Agent Coulson like stabbed in the back kind of thing as Tobey Maguire's looking at Tom Holland. And I'm like, you just killed May. Don't kill one of the Spider-Men. I don't need it right now. I'm like, please don't. Like, we don't. And luckily that turns into a gag. So instead of you at that moment, I thought they were going to kill off the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, but essentially Garfield whips over the cure. Tom Holland grabs it, stabs Norman in the neck, cures him,
and kills Green Goblin.
Kills Goblin, saves
with
Norman.
The cure, yeah.
And then you're worried for Tobey Maguire. There's a good joke of being like, not the first time I've been stabbed, I'm good. I'm like, okay, cool, that's funny. And then you kind of have a great moment between the three Spider-Men who save the day. MJ's okay. Then Doctor Strange comes back. I don't know if it was before this point.
He comes back as like once Lizard's been cured, because like that's when you see Risa Fons as well, where
Ned does his sling ring, right?
Yeah, and then you're basically like the MJ and Ned are like, oh, he's curing them. Like,
right. He tells him he's doing it. He's doing what you said he couldn't do. And then Doctor Strange is like, oh, kind of impressed by that. But then something happens which breaks open the spell, right? Like someone hits the box.
No, because one of the goblin bombs gets in the box,
right?
And it blows up, and it basically unleashes the multiverses, and so the world around
the spell
New York cracks, and so you're seeing the seams break, and all like where you see the 60s cartoon version of Rhino and Scorpion in kind of like cloud form
in silhouettes kind of thing, which I thought was really cool. I saw Scorpion was what I noticed. I can't wait to look at it again and kind of see who else you can kind of pick out, because I'm assuming you'll see silhouettes from
Morph.
every villain and every Spider-Man character. So that'll be exciting. And I'm assuming we'll get some stuff in Morbius, that like probably the aftermath of what happened here. I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised if Morbius also takes place in one of the other Spider-Man universes, because maybe
Raimi's the one on, because Raimi's Spider-Man is the one that's on the wall, right?
Yeah.
Like, who knows? Like that we'll talk about that at the end here.
But then there is a Venom reference in the latest Morbius trailer, and I don't think there is a Spider-Man in the Venom universe, so I don't know.
Right. So that's why I think it could be like a hodgepodge. Who the fuck knows? We'll
I
think
Sony is like on their own with that stuff. But then again, like there's something that I'm now a little bit concerned with where the movie ends and what they could do with it.
Almost done. Doctor Strange, essentially Peter goes back to him and says to him like, how are we going to fix this? And then basically Peter goes, if we go back to the original plan, which was no one remembers who I am, will that solve this? And he goes, yes. So to what Eric mentioned at the beginning of the show, he has to make the ultimate sacrifice of basically what I'm calling both a, sort of a Doctor Strange cheat code, but also just this ultimate sacrifice of being like,
it's worse than death, I think, in a
where
lot of ways.
He has to lose the love of his life. He has to lose his best friend. He has to lose the Avengers. He has to lose, everything, literally everything. And no one will remember who he is. And people won't remember Peter Parker at all, right? Like that's what it is. It's not just people won't remember that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. They just won't know who Peter Parker is. He is on his own. And we were talking to a fellow critic of ours, Stefan, after the movie, and he brought up a good point, being like, if you think too hard about Doctor Strange's powers, it starts to collapse in itself, because you're just like, can he change tweets and news reports? And like when he does this spell, is it just people's memory, or is it like
I think if Peter Parker doesn't exist, or Spider-Man doesn't
in people's heads,
I think like those tweets and those,
do they disappear, or they're there and people
just
won't know?
I just think they're gone, or they're replaced by just Spider-Man. Like
Yeah.
they're like the like I mean, you even see at the
So
end
then
with
he
like
can
J. Jonah
physically
Jameson
change things,
talking
though.
about Spider-Man being or gaining um a fandom, you know, and
Yeah.
some people, and I think that's kind of what would be replaced. It's just
Yeah, that's just,
Spider-Man
I think
talking.
that's just interesting because you think of it, changing someone's memory is one thing, but physically altering, physical things that exist, right? Even if it's digital or, but a newspaper or anything like
Well, you could even
that.
say like, how does that affect like things that Spider-Man's done in the past to help other people, right? Like, does that change like how Vulture was at, like, and like Michael Keaton's Vulture now doesn't know who
Yeah, so
Peter
that's
Parker is.
that's a reset thing, right? Because
Yeah.
like that was a whole big cliffhanger, is that he knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. That kind of resets as well. I wonder what they'll do with all of that. But I think that stuff, you can't think too hard. I think it's okay to criticize that and go like,
Yeah.
it is a bit of an out, an easy out, but like there are things you can pick in that and going, okay, it's a little bit of an easy like reset button of going, well, don't think about it too hard, but just no one knows who Peter Parker is and no one knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. So he's erased from history essentially. Um, which is interesting, and we'll finish that. So, and anyways, he says do it. He has a final moment with MJ and Ned, tells them what's going to happen and has a goodbye with them, which is nice. Goes to the other Spider-Man, says thank you for everything you did, like this is what I chose to do. And then that's the last bit we get with them, which I wish we got maybe something a little bit more, but I understand that it's Tom Holland's movie, not their movie. So, and I have a
We
weird
got more than
feeling.
I thought we would get with them. Like, I
Totally.
honestly thought
But
that
I
they
just
would
meant
just
like
be
closure.
cameos,
And
right?
I just meant like closure.
But they could be leaving it
I
open
know. And I think they are.
for
Like that's
more.
I would not be surprised if this is not the last time we see those characters. I'm more inclined to say we will see Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man again over Tobey Maguire.
Toby's
But
like, I'll do it as long as I'm just wearing plain clothes.
but I also wouldn't be surprised if you see Tobey Maguire now pop up in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But like um I'm really curious, but I would have liked maybe a little bit more closure with those guys. But essentially, what we see is everyone kind of fades out in this like glow, this golden glow. They kind of just fade out and return to their universes. So you see all the villains now cured, return to their universes. You see the two Spider-Men return to their universe.
And now the villains have a
Um,
second chance and that they
mhm.
won't die in those universes. And then
Yeah.
again, like you could also talk about like, okay, well, how does that change those worlds, right? Like,
So I would say that they go back to even different versions of Spider-Man, because they would go back to the Spider-Man at those times, because I'm assuming they would leave basically moments before they died, right?
yeah.
But that'll be interesting because if they come back and
It's
Spider-Man's
it's
fighting them,
basically like a time travel
yeah,
paradox, right?
yeah,
Where or like or
it
like the
would create
butterfly
alternate
effect,
time. It
right?
would create alternate timelines again, right?
Yeah.
You're basically creating a branch reality. Like if you go
Like
by
in
Loki,
Jumanji, right?
if you go by Loki logic, the TVA would interject, right? Like,
Yeah.
but the
But they
TVA at
can't
this
right
point
now. Yeah.
wouldn't, because of everything, which is why I love the interconnected storytelling of the MCU, is because those are things we would bring up and you go, well, if this is after the events of Loki, the TVA might not actually do that because of Kang, all of this stuff. So anyways, Peter, now we see it jumps to Christmas time, which I'm assuming is the same Christmas time as Hawkeye, because we
Yeah.
saw the Rogers the musical billboards earlier in the movie, and now it's at Christmas time.
Christmas
Um,
time is
that
here.
song was in today's episode of Hawkeye. You haven't watched it yet, but so it's Christmas time. Peter goes to get a cup of coffee at the coffee shop that MJ works at. He has a speech all written out that he wants to say to her to try to convince her that they were in love and that they know each other and things like that. But I think once he sees her and Ned talking about how they're going to MIT and that they kind of have normal lives, he worries that if he involves them again, that they will be hurt, or their lives will be put in danger again, or he'll ruin their lives again. So he ends up just having this kind of very normal exchange with MJ where they just kind of talk.
Well, kind of
Um,
awkward, but like awkward
yeah,
in
in a
a
cute
very,
way.
yeah, but also kind of
Yeah.
sad.
Very sad.
Yeah.
It's way better than I think the Dark Knight Rises epilogue kind of thing of like the Alfred drinking his Fernie Branca or whatever, and like and stuff like that, and like the wink. Like I feel like that doesn't work as well as like this, where you actually have a connection and you can't talk to this person, and then he goes to May's grave. It has that same kind of moment with Happy Hogan, who doesn't know who he is now either, but he knows, which I think is interesting because he knows May and then knows he has a relationship with May. So this is where it gets confusing because then I was like, how do people have alternate memories of how they met someone and stuff like that?
I
Or they go,
guess
oh,
so. I think you'd have to
I
fill in the
can't
blanks.
remember. I can't remember how we met. Maybe he just knows that he had a relationship with May, but then he goes, oh, how did I meet May Parker? Like, I don't remember kind of thing. Like, I guess that's how it would work. But, um, I thought Happy at that moment, like there was going to be a thing where like Happy somehow like Tony put some chip in his brain that doesn't let his memory get erased or
That's why
something.
he
Cause
also
I
has
thought
sleep
like
apnea as
apnea.
well.
So Happy doesn't know who he is. So Peter has this moment with Happy and tells him that he's going to continue. And then a moment that I absolutely love and what I go back to of like, I can't believe that this is like the fifth or sixth movie we've had Tom Holland Spider-Man in, and it's sort of an origin story, which
Yeah.
I would have never guessed that this is basically we're getting the classic Spider-Man origin story with the Uncle Ben death, who is Aunt May, the Peter now is becoming the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and he creates his suit from scratch. He's not using a Tony Stark suit because that stuff's all gone. No one remembers him and he can't get that stuff. He sews a suit together in his new apartment that he gets. I thought Mr. Dekovich was going to come in
I did
and
too. I
like
was thinking the whole time, it's like the internet's prayers have been answered.
yeah. Does his daughter make him cookies or whatever? Like, but it sounded like it was the guy from the mini mart or whatever, the bodega. It sounded
Right.
like that guy. I forget the guy's name, but the guy Peter saves in the first movie. Mr. Delgar, right? I got it. I think it's
Yeah.
Delgar. So it sounded like Mr. Delgar. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was above Mr. Delgar's convenience store in Queens. And then you get this moment where he created his own costume and he's going to continue being Spider-Man, and he swings out of his window, and I get chills thinking about it that like I've talked about it. I love the MCU version of Spider-Man, but the one thing, and I think other people have this criticism too, is that like, and to your point, Eric, which I think is a good thing, it's different than the other Spider-Man movies. They did their own version of Spider-Man. They changed things. They melded characters together. His origin was different. He was, it got very big very quickly. You never really got, other than Homecoming, a little bit, or mostly throughout Homecoming, you see him kind of start, but he still had Tony Stark's suit. He had an AI system. He had all of this stuff. Like it was still heavily involved with the Avengers and after Civil War. Like when you drop that character
You
in,
never saw him got bit by the spider. You never
yeah.
saw any of that stuff.
And I'm not saying you necessarily needed that, but it was more so like, it's what I talk about. Why, again, I'm going back to Batman too, who is like tied for first or maybe slightly second of my favorite superheroes. Like I like my Batman stories more grounded, more of those, street level villains, that the detective work. Like when Batman gets too big, when it involves Superman and like supernatural stuff and
Nipples on
space stuff, like,
suits.
um, it loses me. And like, I loved when Scott Snyder started writing Batman, it started in Detective Comics and it started really small. And I think Scott Snyder is one of the best, comic book writers of all time. But as he started to grow with that character, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I lost a little bit of interest towards the end of his run on Batman because he was doing Dark Knight Metal and stuff like this. And it was alternate universes and all this stuff. And Spider-Man, I think, is similar, where I like the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Like I kind of like that he's just New York superhero. Like there are bigger villains, but it's mostly street level. And that's why I'm surprised how much I love the MCU version of the character, because it's not that, but I think it's because I love the MCU so much, and we already had two other iterations that were pretty classic versions of Spider-Man. So what this movie is so fascinating of how it's able to kind of celebrate all of that, celebrate the MCU versions, celebrate the classic versions, but then also give us a reset point where Peter Parker, now a little bit more grown up, a little bit more mature, has a ton of loss in his life, had to give away everything, but is now going, you know what? I'm going to be that friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I'm going to keep going for May. I'm going to keep going for Tony, for Happy, everyone. Um, is so cool. And like, I'm can't wait to see where they go next. And we get a little tease of that in the post credit scene, but like, I don't know how you felt, Eric, but like that's
Yeah,
with the
I'm a
ending.
little I like it from a narrative point of view, and I really like that the ending is the beginning and sort of, to your point, restarting everything. But I'm also nervous, not because of the film, but because of what that could entail for Tom Holland Spider-Man in the future, meaning that if Marvel and Sony don't work together to sort of continue their partnership, that now this Tom Holland Spider-Man, who basically has erased the memory of everybody who knew who he was, is excluded from the MCU, because now there's this opportunity for Sony to be like, well, we don't
There's a
want that
reset
anymore.
point.
Yeah,
It can still technically be part of that universe, but because you've erased everyone's memory, no one has to reference one or the other. So like
exactly.
we could keep going. Tom Holland would still have all those memories though, right? So like you'd have to kind of sort of address it. And if you don't make that deal, then Sony can't reference any of that
Which I could
stuff.
see them being like, oh, well, we can just
Um
figure that out to not like write it in there,
I
especially with Craven the Hunter coming up and things like
Sure.
that, where
I really like I know the deal's not done. I mean, Amy Pascal talked about how they're going to keep making them. They have another trilogy in mind and things like that. And um I think they'd be stupid not to continue the relationship even at the 75-25. I think it's what it's at right now. Disney pays 25% of the budget, they get 25% of the profits. And this movie's going to make $1 billion or more, probably
yeah, I
more.
mean, even with
Um
sort of, maybe certain restrictions coming back into place for
Ontario, but we're such a
Ontario.
small part of it. And I don't think the states are going to go back into a lockdown no matter what happens. But like this movie, truly, I think like they'd be really the success that they've seen in these three movies and the interconnectedness of Spider-Man in the MCU, I think is almost necessary. And like, it's you saw with the Garfield movies that there are fans of those movies, and I think that he is redeemed in this movie, but like it didn't work, right? Like you tried, you go, okay, we're doing another version of Spider-Man. It's gonna be a little darker, it's gonna be more modern, like it's Peter Parker's gonna be a little cooler kind of thing. And then by the second movie, people are like, nah, bro, I don't want this. Like maybe you go the Miles Morales route. Like is a reference to him in this. We got a reference to him in Homecoming as well with Donald Glover.
Because Donald Glover's character
Um,
is the Prowler, right? Like
yes,
he
yeah,
becomes the
and
Prowler.
but I mean, we've already gotten that into the Spider Verse, right? We're getting
Yeah,
across the Spider Verse soon. Is there going to be some
part one.
crossover there? Yeah, like um, I think it's a really interesting spot. But I'm with you where it could be a good spot. Like Sony put themselves in a good spot where they're like, we could keep going MCU or we could go do our own thing after this, right? Like, and
They should
that's
keep doing MCU, because you
yeah,
brought up it perfectly with the Amazing Spider-Man, where when that was rebooted, I kind of felt like people were going through that reboot fatigue at that point, where like
yeah,
everything, people, audiences were catching on to the fact that it's like, okay, how many times do we have to, like the joke of like, how many times do we have to see Uncle Ben die, or how many times do we have to go through the origin story yet again? So then when you had the Holland Spider-Man come into Civil War and kind of skip over a lot of that stuff, even though it's still referenced throughout the trilogy and his other appearances in the MCU movies, it kind of felt a little bit fresh, and it was able to again sort of ignite excitement in people that were maybe kind of feeling a little bit burnt out on Spider-Man, or at least when it came to like rebooting him over and over again. And this movie kind of reboots at the
Spider-Man
end.
again, yeah, it
Yeah,
does, while
so
keeping
but
all that history and keeping the
at least
memories
for
and stuff like
him,
that.
like
Yeah,
he'll have that history. So
and we will as an audience, yeah.
yeah. But I'm talking about like in terms of like what Sony is going to do. I think they could go either way, but I think they would be shooting themselves in the foot
Yeah.
if they went the we're gonna build the Sony verse version of
Sony
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man SSU2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be like they already saw when they tried to back out the first time of the backlash, and not saying that, oh, nerds rise up, they should get what they want all the time. And
But then
but I
again, look
just
at the Snyder cut.
yeah, I would be shocked if they didn't continue this relationship. Like, you got to think, like, I don't think these Spider-Man movies make as much money as they do if they're not in the MCU, right? Like, I think it is vital. The MCU is so powerful now. Marvel Studios is so powerful now that I don't think you can do it. Like, they could get out of the game completely and go, well, should we still pay 75 and get 75% and let Disney in on this, or sell the character back? And I don't think they'll make more money in the long run just by keep going to bed with Marvel Studios than selling the character back, I think, because if they're going to make a bill on this movie, like, how much is one character worth? Like, there could be a time where Sony, there are always rumors that Sony's movie side doesn't make that much money, right? Like, and I could see an asset swap, or just like we're finally selling Spider-Man back, but then we're going to sell our studio to someone else, or I don't know. But I don't even know what the terms of these deals are. Like, that's what's confusing to me. It's like, if they keep making them, they keep the rights to it, right? That's what it
Right.
is. It's like, is it infinite? Like, is it just like, as long as you keep making them, you
Well,
have the
I
rights to
think
it
there's like almost like a period where it's like if you don't make the movie
for like
within like
5 years or something, isn't
the
it?
rights lapse back to the original owners, and that's
Which
where
is
like
why Marvel got Daredevil and other things too, right?
yeah, and that's why the Amazing Spider-Man movies were made, because Sony didn't want to give up those rights, because that was a big deal for them. So they made those movies hesitantly and kind of maybe jumped in head first when they should have taken more time in developing the stories, but they were in a rush to keep the rights from reverting back to Marvel. And so for that, like, that's it
And
is a good bargaining chip. But then also you have to think like, okay, how much power and clout does someone like Tom Holland have now,
yeah.
who maybe is somebody that can kind of negotiate on his own and kind of get Sony to come back into the Marvel fold again, because he probably realizes that this character and playing this character is most valuable working alongside Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios.
So,
So
yeah,
yeah,
I'm going back to what that original deal was that they made with Disney again. It was only a two-picture deal, wasn't it? And wasn't it for this movie and one more cameo movie?
I
I
think so.
thought.
And then also you have to think as well, another thing that'll be interesting moving forward is that John Watts is directing Fantastic Four.
And that's
So
where I thought Spider-Man might show up, but maybe gets an internship with, Reed Richards or something like that. Like, now that he's a bit older, and like, I could see Spider-Man being involved there. And that would kind of make sense because they wouldn't know anyway about Peter Parker, and you have him interact with new characters and stuff like that. So, like, I really could see that happening, that you have, Spider-Man shows up as an intern with Reed Richards, and or like Spider-Man freshman year, right? Like, that animated series um is an origin story for the Spider-Man, I think, right? Which is interesting. And I don't think you use Tom Holland um as the voice there. I don't think you blow it on that, because you probably get the guy who did Peter Parker and What If. I'm assuming that's who you get for that show. And then to the post-credit scene, there's two of them.
well, one's a post credit
One's a
scene and then
scene, one's a
one's a
trailer.
trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I even think is a throwback as well. Reminds me, I remember in the first Captain America movie, we got the trailer for Avengers. We've had this, before in other movies too. But the first sequence, because you're wondering, the post credit for Venom for everyone who fucking went to that movie let it made too much money. Uh, you get Tom Hardy, Eddie Brock chilling in Mexico, talking to Danny Rojas from Ted Lasso. And it was Danny Rojas, right? I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. Um, and he's kind of going, okay, so in this universe, there's all these super people. They fought an alien who snapped everyone away, and everyone went away for 5 years. So there's like funny MCU references as Tom Hardy's going, what the hell? And then Venom going, alien eats brains, not snaps jewels or whatever. And you're like, oh, great. I get to see this fucking Venom again. Great. And then you're worried because you're like, wait, everyone else already left. Is he just like, did he stick around because Doctor Strange didn't know about him or something? Because like, that sucks. and
Well,
and
because also
then
he says like he wants to go visit Spider-Man, right? Like he should
yeah.
pay him a visit.
So, and it's just a red herring. He gets zapped out of the universe just like the other villains did. And then it pans to the table and you see a piece of the symbiote on the bar table. Will Danny Rojas become the first Venom in the MCU? We'll find out. But like, and I leaned over to you and I'm like, fucking perfect.
Right.
Because I was just so thrilled with that, because that means we're not getting Tom Hardy in the MCU. It was more just a way to get the symbiote in the MCU, which I think is fantastic. Um, does that mean you still get that Venom voice and stuff like that? I mean, they can fuck around and do whatever they want. It doesn't matter. But I love that they did this. Like, it's almost like a Kevin Feige and going, okay, we'll take a little bit of the symbiote, but you can keep him over there. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Send him back.
Like, yeah, it's fine. We don't need to like, yeah, we don't need that. So you can send him back. I don't know. Will Venom 3 deal with him going, I need to know, I want to get back there because I want to know who that is? Or maybe that wasn't all of Venom, right? That was just a piece of him, right? Of the
Yeah.
symbiote. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I like that introduction because I always loved the Black Suit Spider-Man story, and Venom in general. So if we get our own Black Suit Tom Hardy, Tom Holland, Spider-Man story in the MCU, and maybe our own Venom version, Flash Thompson. Just saying, they
Or
used
you
him.
could see Eddie Brock be reintroduced into, like, I mean, like even with Fantastic Four, right?
Yeah,
I could almost see like that kind of being something that comes into play. If you mentioned, like he takes an internship with Reed Richards, I could see Brock also working there, Eddie Brock
yeah,
working there as well, and them
that's true.
competing
Or
or
at the
something
Daily
like that.
Bugle, like in New York, though, and it's a different version of Eddie Brock here, but it's still Tom Hardy. Um, I could see that. But I would like them to go the Flash Thompson route, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't know if uh Tony Ravioli, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if he, I think he's got it. I would like to see him tackle that. Like, I think it could
Unless
be
they
really
change it though,
interesting.
and they make it a different character
That's
entirely,
true.
like
There's other people who have been,
because wasn't
Venom
J.
and
Jonah Jameson's son the one that brought the symbiote back originally?
yeah.
So they could do something there since there is a J. Jonah Jameson in this universe.
Yeah. So and that, to your point, would make sense with the Tom Hardy or as Eddie Brock or something. Like, they can pick and choose which actors want to be different versions of the characters or whatever. But I love that we don't get that version of Venom and that everyone kind of goes back to their own universe, right? But
Yeah.
then that also is breaking a little bit because we talked about earlier being like, I thought it was only people who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man that got sucked into the universe. Why would Venom?
Yeah. Because he only found out about him once he was sucked in, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Is it just because there's a connection there, or maybe it thought it was sucking in the Topher Grace version, but
Maybe.
then
I
the
don't
spell
know.
got confused and sucked in? Like, that does make sense to me because you got every other villain from those movies other than Rhino, right? Like,
Well, also
um,
Harry. I think I
oh
think
yeah,
I think Harry, because that would have been, I mean, you could say, oh well, we already have one Green Goblin, but and that probably would have opened up another can of worms with just like Toby Maguire. And I mean, they weren't going to obviously going to bring James Franco back, but
Dane
he
DeHaan though.
Yeah, there you go. So like,
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, yeah.
but then also going back, the other thing as well with Matt Murdock, it's like you could also question, it's like, well, why didn't Daredevil show up to help with, the scene at the Statue of Liberty?
Yeah, but has that really been Daredevil's thing, like a big thing like that? Like,
I
again,
think if
he
it's
is
on
more
his
street
own,
level.
if it's in his own
If it's in
backyard,
Hell's Kitchen.
yeah.
Um,
He
uh,
only go he can't leave Hell's Kitchen. That's the only
yeah.
place he can
To
go.
me, it would, going back to Hawkeye, like if he doesn't show up in the finale, would be kind of weird to me. But like, um, we'll see. And then finally, very end of the movie, you're wondering what the post credits is. All the Sony logos come up, and I'm like, oh shit, are we not getting like a post credit scene? Because usually that stuff comes before the Sony logos. Because usually that's like the movie's done. Here's the end of the credits. Pascal Pictures, Sony logo, Columbia Pictures, bye bye. Then you get something where I'm like, okay, we're getting like a full teaser trailer for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and it was almost too much to take in, Eric. Like at that point, we're like just coming
You're
down
still
from this high.
processing.
You're processing the movie. You're like, wow, I don't know how I feel yet, but I feel like overwhelmed almost, like in a good way. But I don't know how to feel. The Venom scene, I'm like, great, get that guy out of here. That's perfect. And then you get this Doctor Strange trailer that's about what, a minute long, maybe minute and a
Yeah.
half. Teaser trailer. But it introduces a hell of a lot of elements. You see Wanda, they reference WandaVision. You see, Doctor Strange. You see, what's his name from the first movie? He
Chiwetel
was
Ejiofor?
Chiwetel Ejiofor, who
I think
seems
it's
to be
like
like one of
Baron
the,
or
yeah,
Baron or
yeah. Again, I'm not the biggest Doctor Strange fan. Like, it's pretty low on my MCU ranking. Um, and you see some of uh just random clips from the movie of Doctor Strange and different elements of Mordo. Um,
Mordo. Baron.
Mordo, and like I think it's Baron Mordo though, or
Oh, okay.
something like that. So we were both right. Anyways, it was too much to process where I can barely remember what's in it. You see the Cthulhu kind of like monster kind of thing, or the one eyeball monster from What If, and then I think that's the Sorcerer Supreme version of like Doctor Strange from What If, right? But
Yeah, well,
I was,
even the room that they're in at the end is almost like the same room where that episode of What If begins, right? Where like he's thinking about the death of Rachel McAdams' character on the anniversary.
and then so Tim, when I was DMing with Tim Geddes and with Joey Noel today as well, um, we were talking, and he's just like, "Is that because didn't that Doctor Strange become like a good guy in that final episode when he helps the Guardians of the Multiverse or whatever?" And I'm like, but he still has all that evil in him from all those things that he like sucked in, right? And he almost
Yeah, and the
destroyed the
Watcher sent
universe,
him back to his
his prison,
prison,
right?
so I could almost see like this disruption of
He's
the
a
multiverse
Yeah, gives
letting
him an
him out.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like even though he helped save the multiverse, like he's still kind of in it for himself.
Yeah,
So
and I
anyways,
mean, we
that
were talking about like the villains kind of complying with Spider-Man at first, right? Like
yeah.
people have different facets of their personality where it's
And they
like
might be doing
sometimes
it
they
for
can be
themselves,
helpful
even though they're
or yeah.
helping the Watcher ultimately. Like he might have his own motivation. So like I do still think that it is like it's very clearly the What If Doctor Strange. He has the same pointy beard and the grayish hair, and
Yeah.
like
Well, it's
it
almost like Jet Black, right?
and yeah,
Like
jet
it's
black, that's what I meant. And like he has that, it looks like the outfit straight from What If. And like I'm I'm curious to watch it again because like I barely remember any of it because I was thinking so much about the movie that it was just like, and it goes by so quickly where you see Wanda in her outfit and you see Rachel McAdams, you see some people come back, and you see America Chavez. Um, is that her name? No.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't but they haven't really announced who the character is.
It's like
Like
Ms. America or something. It's a multiverse character. Like, um, and I know it from the comics a little bit. Um, Yeah, but I gotta watch that trailer again because like because I barely could process it in the moment. But again, felt like a weird throwback where they're like, oh, we're gonna put now. You made a good point of being like, well, it's because everyone now has the context of this movie, so this probably won't even be online for a little while.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably see like the trailer probably pop up like early next year, and maybe they'll make some announcements of like maybe like the full cast list or something like that. I don't know. It's one of those things where again like it's almost too much, and like there is enough of a buffer zone between now and May when it's when Doctor Strange is being released, but it's like to your point, you've just spent all this time with this kind of event movie and you need kind of a moment to kind of take it all in, and I understand doing the post credit scene is tradition, but it's just weird that it's like, oh, we're just gonna give you this trailer for the movie and
We're
this
gonna
like
throw a
here it.
million things at you.
Yeah.
And remember Sam Raimi, he directed one of those Spider-Man movies. So I think you do get a kind of Raimi kind of, ghost shot in there, which I going to the cabin or something, I forget. But again, it's all kind of a blur.
It wasn't
Um
as like because I remember I think
Raimi-esque.
well I wasn't even gonna say Raimi, but like a lot of the cast members that have talked a little bit about like what it's been like shooting have all said it's kind of very much a horror movie, and I didn't really get like that true kind of like creepy horror movie vibe from the trailer. Like it's not cut that way, it's just
Well, yeah, I
an
think
MCU film. So
yeah, I
I'd be
think
curious to see like contextually when we do watch the movie to see how much of Sam Raimi's kind of horror influences are in the film,
yeah. Well, that was fun, man.
or
Final
as
kind
long as
of
the movie almost.
almost, which makes sense. We talked about
Yes.
basically every element of it. Um, I'm so excited to see where they go next. I don't know. I guess you like they tease the Venom thing, so you got to think Black Suit Spider-Man is where they go next. I mean, you'd have to think that, but even that, I just don't know how you tackle that with. I mean, Peter has all the memories of the past, so there could be something interesting to play with there, where he goes a little bit darker route if he is the one who ends up, having the symbiote on him first. But I just want that classic black suit Spider-Man with the big white spider and stuff. Like I love it so much, dude.
Sorry, it just looked like you were
Just
rubbing it.
rubbing my
Sorry.
nipples. I'm so excited. Um, where do you think they go next? Just to wrap things up, like you already kind of touched on it. Like, do you think they're gonna make another MCU deal and it's gonna stay in the
They
MCU?
have to, but it will be interesting to see where they go with like okay, like what villain they'll pick
Yeah,
after this, and
you gotta
like
think
what.
Vulture comes back at some point, or I don't
Yeah,
know, but
or like are they going to bring in someone like Craven? Because like that's been a character that I think even Tom Holland has said that kind of interested him. And I know that they're doing the Aaron Taylor Johnson JC Chandor movie, which I think is scheduled to probably start shooting probably next year sometime.
mhm.
So that'll be interesting to see if that's also just going to be in its own universe or will be connected to.
Just starting to break everyone's brain if you bring him into the
I
MCU as
know, but
Craven.
his
Yeah.
character is so synonymous with Spider-Man. Like one of the kind of the pivotal storylines with that character is
Is the
him coming
hunt,
to New
right? Yeah.
York and hunting him down.
Yeah. Which
Like it's
you
like what's the point of doing a Craven the
Which
Hunter
I yeah,
movie?
I know. I guess an origin of how, because Craven had to have that thirst from somewhere, right? So like I get that
Craven's just a
part.
thirst trap.
Thirst boy. Um I see that part, but I do agree that these villain movies just never work. Like when have they worked? Like Joker, I know a lot of people hate, but like worked
But
for the
Joker's
most
truly its
part.
own thing,
Yeah.
where like even with Venom, like it's still kind of teased that okay, well we can
Cuz you have
bring.
to make them the hero kind of thing, and it
Yeah,
just doesn't. It
and
kind of
also just
waters it down.
like how does like again with Morbius,
We
my
get that in like a month,
I
right?
know that connection I've always had with Blade. Blade has always been the character that has been associated with Morbius. Like in the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, it was always like very similar to Craven the Hunter when Morbius kind of starts, feeding on, people of New York. It prompts Blade to come to New York with Whistler to track Morbius down.
Yeah.
And that was always kind of like the introduction of Blade. So I don't know really what you like do with this, Jared Leto version.
We get it in literally a month and a half, so you don't have long to wait. You don't have long to wait. Yeah, I hope he shows up in, not Morbius, Tom Holland in, like, he's got to be in the John Watts Fantastic Four. That just makes the most sense. Like if you're gonna have him in another MCU movie and introduce him to this next, phase of the MCU where no one knows him, you can start to introduce him with other people. Like I want to see him interact with Kate Bishop, and I want to see, like, yeah, the Fantastic Four, because that is a big part of Peter Parker's life in the comics as well. Like I think that stuff's really cool, and just
Well, even
maybe.
Blade, right? Like
Mhm.
like again, like that is a big storyline in the animated 90s cartoon.
Yeah. Any other villains like from the 90s cartoon that you think of best Spider-Man villains before we wrap things up? We've
I
covered,
mean,
like,
Scorpion's the one that kind of is like,
they've teased already as
yeah,
well,
but then
right?
again, you have to think like what version of a villain are they doing? Because like, they've played with like the lesser ones and sort of like with Shocker and the Tinkerer and things like that, and then they've kind of made fun of, ones that don't really exist in this world, like Hydro Man and things like that. So
I'd love for them. I keep going back to this because they rebooted and he's at that ground level in New York again. That I would like to see him. He's interacted with so many of the gigantic, larger than life. He jokes about going to space. He was part of Endgame kind of thing. Like, put him in that kind of street level of the MCU. Like have him interact with Kate Bishop, have him interact with
Kingpin,
Kingpin,
yeah.
like have him interact with Daredevil, like that kind of stuff. Introduce a version of the Rhino, like do your version of it. Like that could be kind of like, the Rhino is ridiculous, but he is still a little bit more earth level, street level than, and most Spider-Man villains kind of are, but they get a little ridiculous when you get into an alien like Venom, or even how they did Mysterio was so perfect. Vulture was a great version. Morbius is up there. So Morbius and Craven, who they're kind of wasting on these origin movies that, um, not even origin movies, just like anti-hero movies that I'm not quite sure, because they
Do you
never
bring
go
Punisher
full.
back in to the fold at that
And
point
that's what
as
I
well?
mean. Like, I think
It
you
makes sense
go.
because they both auditioned as well together. Like they both shot each other's John
Yeah, I
Bernthal
remember they're
and
like
Tom
kind of
Holland.
friends, aren't they? Or
Yeah.
they kind of know each other. Scorpion would be one that you don't use. Chameleon, which I think could be really interesting. Mr. Negative that I talked about, which they've introduced Feast. So maybe Peter continues to volunteer at Feast because in May's memory, because he knows about it. Um, I think that could be really interesting. So there are still more people that, Hobgoblin, like if you sort of do that, Tombstone is on this. The Jackal, is the Jackal the guy who does the Clone Saga? Is that, I forget, but there's a whole clone saga in Spider-Man which we haven't really seen in any movie, with Ben Reilly and like all the clones of Peter Parker, and like, um do they go that crazy again like right away? Like there's Superior Spider-Man, which is an awesome storyline where Doc Ock, like basically him and Peter Parker switch places, and Doc Ock's brain goes into Peter Parker's body, and then he becomes the Superior Spider-Man, where he's like, I'm going to be the ultimate, not, I keep using these words that are describers for different versions of Spider-Man, like Ultimate Spider-Man, but he's going to be superior, the best Spider-Man. He's like, and he does, like, he's just more vicious, and he's like, but he's also the best version that Spider-Man could ever be, because Doc Ock's smarter than Peter Parker and things like that. That whole storyline is really, really interesting. I
That could be
know,
a what if episode though, I think as well, where like I could see them being like, okay, well
do
maybe
Superior Spider-Man
yeah.
in that, but the Clone Saga I think could be really interesting. But once you start incorporating, I know some people hate the Clone Saga, but I think it's like an iconic 90s Spider-Man story. Um and or do you have them incorporated into Spider-Verse? I think could be interesting too, right?
Yeah, and then
Um,
also you got to think about like what are the other anti-hero movies that Sony has been trying to develop. Madam Web keeps coming up, which I think Madam Web would actually fit perfectly within the multiverse stuff that's happening right now.
well, that's kind of what it is, right? So
Yeah.
maybe this is going to kick off with Venom and Morbius and the other Sony Spider-Man universe, whatever they call it. Like um that could Madam Web could you incorporate that because she usually controls like the Spider-Man universe kind of thing from my understanding. I'm not super familiar with her, but I
Because I think
know.
Olivia Wilde was attached to direct the film at one point, and then also there was the Black Cat movie that they were trying to do as well. And
Yep, I think you probably incorporate now. Like, I don't know if Zendaya wants to come back or if she'll be part of it, but you might incorporate a new love interest for Peter Parker moving forward. Do you introduce a Gwen Stacy? Do you introduce a Felicia Hardy? Um, I'm not quite sure. And then the Norman Osborn stuff, we know that there isn't a Norman Osborn in the MCU, so you can kind of go a different route there as well, right? But yeah, the
I mean, maybe
Jackal
Norman
is the villain.
Osborn will be Doctor Doom in this if they
Yeah.
do the Fantastic Four
See,
thing.
yeah, that could be interesting, right? Like there's stuff there that and the MCU is known to kind of combine multiple characters, right? But or Victor Von Doom might just also be like a Fantastic Four and Spider-Man villain because of you have to change that up. You've seen Doctor Doom twice now and two failed. Talk about two failed franchises, and not saying that the Raimi movies were a fail, but John Watts coming in and doing a third version of Spider-Man. Now he's coming in and doing a third version of Fantastic Four. I think that's kind of interesting. But yeah, the Jackal was the villain that starts cloning people, and I just don't know if they go the clone route. I wouldn't put it past them. Like the MCU, you'd buy it because there's aliens and shit. So cloning actually makes more sense than that. But um, really, really curious and excited to see where they would go next because I honestly thought that this would be like I thought they'd leave it in a point that feels like this is the end of Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I really kind of thought that. I know he's young enough still, and like he could make, if he wants to keep making bank, like this is going to be his, make 3 to 5 more of these things, and I mean, he's already set for life, but
Well,
he'll just
I mean, a lot of people. I don't. He doesn't have the he. I mean, not that I'm saying that Robert Downey Jr. is the world's greatest actor, or like like Downey was on an interesting trajectory, kind of coming back before Iron Man, but Holland never really had that. But now you look at like if Holland signs another deal and does another 3 movies and then makes appearances, he'll basically become the new Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man, who continually is doing these movies and sort of is a main figurehead within the MCU.
yeah. But I mean, I think not only him, like you see other legacy characters that have stuck around for 10
Chris
plus years,
Hemsworth,
right?
right?
Hemsworth is still there. Even Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner, like in the Hulk, like it seems like he's going to continue moving forward, who have been there even longer than Holland. So it's interesting to see who sticks with it and who goes, I'm good. Like, did Marissa Tomei, was she maybe one of the people who was like, I mean, you can Marissa Tomei me, but like I might be good. I don't know if I need to come back for any more of these.
Right.
Who
I mean,
knows?
it
I
is
don't
an
know.
easy paycheck for a lot of these like really talented character actors and sort of like again, movie stars that are in different parts of their career now where like I wonder like yeah, it's probably fun doing scenes with, you know, like Alfred Molina and Marissa Tomei have worked together before, but like seeing Marissa Tomei and Willem Dafoe together was kind of interesting and like that,
Because they haven't worked together.
no, they
Yeah.
haven't. And so like that kind of stuff I think is worthwhile to the actors on top of being paid well, but at the same time it's like if you're giving me not a lot to do with the character, it's probably just becomes a job for them, and it's
Mhm.
almost like, well, maybe Marisa Tomei wants to go and do some other stuff now,
Oh,
and
I don't. That's what I mean. Like, it could have been her decision. It could have been, theirs telling her. Maybe she would have done more. But, um, anyways, I'm pumped, man. What a movie. Um, I'll reiterate how much I loved it from the review, but, um, just how much I love the MCU, how much I love this character, and how much I love superhero movies, and like how much it did for all of those things, makes it one of my favorite movies of the year, if not my favorite movie of the year, if not one of my favorite MCU movies, if not my favorite MCU movie. I'm still like waiting to see it more and see how it sits with me, and you know again, my MCU rankings always shift around a bit when I do rewatches, and like I'll be eager to do a rewatch, and now I'm going to be a madman and go, I gotta watch the Raimi movies and the Webb movies, like part of my MCU rewatch now, because technically they're kind of part of it. So, that adds 5 more movies on top of this, if not Venom as well, and other
and then DC
things.
next year has the
Flashpoint.
Flashpoint movie.
Yeah. So I'm still sitting on it. Can't wait to watch it again. Um, but as of right now, I have it in like number 2 behind Endgame, where I think Endgame to me just so perfectly. It's both number 2 in my MCU and in my Spider-Man rankings. Cause like,
Interesting.
um, I love Into the Spider-Verse so much, which I think is like almost a perfect movie, that I think it is one of the best superhero movies, one of my favorite movies. And then I think that this could be my favorite live action Spider-Man, although I really love Homecoming for a lot of those reasons that I said, with being a little bit of a smaller, more grounded New York based Spider-Man story. And then Spider-Man 2 for nostalgia reasons. And then you kind of get, the amazing movies, and things like that wrapped around that. And then the MCU, I think recency bias comes into it when you're riding off of a high, which I think is still why I have Endgame so high and Infinity War. Like, they just feel like massive movies. Those mixed with like Infinity War, Endgame, and this movie are the 3 biggest Marvel movies, I'd say. And they happen to be the most impactful to me, and the ones I enjoy the most, just because, like, I don't know, it's the culmination of many, many years of storytelling. Um, but then you get into personal favorites like Thor Ragnarok, Iron Man 3, different things like that. But I'm just so fucking thrilled with this movie. I can't wait to see it again with the crowd. Are you gonna go see it again with the crowd?
Yeah, I'm gonna see it with my brother Kyle when he comes back, when he comes home for the holidays from Vancouver.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'm
How are you
excited about that.
feeling ranking wise right now with this? Because I know you do
It's
an
it's
MCU
probably
ranking,
yeah, it's
and
probably like right now it's at 6.
it's pretty high, pretty high.
Yeah, I still
Ah,
think I like Homecoming the most in terms of I
I
think that's
totally
like at number
understand that. Yeah.
3. Um and again, like I think I still think Spider-Man 2 is probably my favorite overall of all the Spider-Man movies, but then I think Spider-Verse is starting to kind of creep up on that, and like it just did something really unique with the medium in a way that
Yeah, that's why
both
it's my
complements
favorite.
comic books and then also kind of expands upon them. And that's why I like this movie as well quite a bit, where like it plays with the mythology and the legacy of, again, almost 20 years. And I mean, the Amazing Spider-Man's almost 10. It'll be 10 next year.
It's
um
ridiculous.
and
I
so
remember being at Comic-Con watching the Hall H footage for that movie and just being so stoked.
yeah, and so like when you're thinking about that, it's interesting where like I think it builds on the bones of your expectations and, you know, those kind of warm feelings that you have when seeing, someone like Toby Maguire show up, and it does more with it to flesh out certain character beats and storylines than say Ghostbusters Afterlife, where I was completely kind of like against, it being just
Bringing
purely
back legacy
nostalgia.
characters just for that, yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
not
kind of
giving them much.
forcing things, and it's, I mean, even with Stranger Things a little bit, where it's like it kind of hinges on your nostalgia, but it never really builds upon it. It never really creates more than just that feeling of, oh, I remember that time, or I was around at that period, and I remember seeing the first Spider-Man movie at, the
Yeah.
AMC in Whitby, and just remembering how much of an event it was to see Spider-Man in a live action movie for the first time. But it does that, and then it adds to it in terms of like where
And I think that's
Spider-Man
why I
has
love it, yeah.
is gone, like over the years.
And that's why
So
I think I like it more. Like again, I defend Spider-Man 2 as well. I still think a lot of people think it's one of the best superhero movies of all time. I think it is kind of its time, but uh I still think it holds up. Like I still think it's a banger. Like I would still put it, number 4 or something in my
I
ranking
mean,
because
those
it's just like
soundtracks as well from the
yeah,
early
we kept
2000s.
we kept joking about that. I was listening to Hero and Vindicated, Hero by Chad Kroger and Josie Scott, Vindicated by Dashboard Confessional, and like going to the other stuff. I will say that these Spider-Man movies have the best soundtrack for sure, the John Watts ones, just because like it's legitimately good music. I like laughing at the music from the original ones, and they're very, nostalgic.
Although
But
I will say it's Michael Giacchino, right?
oh, the
That
score. Yeah, sure. I mean the soundtrack, not necessarily
Oh
the
yeah, yeah,
score. Because I think Danny Elfman's score way more iconic than any of the Giacchino scores in the amazing or in the MCU, the home trilogy.
yeah.
Um like I don't mind the dun, 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 like the MCU Spider-Man theme, but it never really like completely clicked with me. Like I don't
No,
like I think the Spider-Man 1, and I barely remember, it's James Horner who did the amazing ones or no?
I it might have
Um
been. It would probably be one of his last too.
before he passed away.
Yeah. But
Um
yeah, I really love the Danny Elfman score.
oh,
For
it's great. And I
It's
think
one
you
of his
get like
last good
a
scores too.
yeah, and you get a little bit of it in this movie, right? Like they don't bring back the themes per se, but
No,
um it is who did the music? Yeah, James Horner did the music, and that would have been in 2012. Which I forget when James Horner passed away, 2015. Um, so his last scores were Amazing Spider-Man, then he goes into Southpaw, and The Magnificent Seven was his last score. Which is unfortunate. But
yeah.
the Amazing Spider-Man James Horner's theme, I don't remember that much either. But like, and I'd say the music in this is good. But I love Michael Giacchino, and just as an end cap, not to end on a negative note or anything, but like, um, what's funny about Giacchino is that he did the Doctor Strange 1 score. He is being replaced by Danny Elfman in Multiverse of Madness, which is interesting. Elfman coming back to reteam with Raimi. Giacchino also did the scores of Spider-Man. He did the score to Star Wars, another MCU too, didn't he? Or he just got announced to be doing Thor, Love
Yeah.
and Thunder.
And then he
And
also did, I think my favorite stuff from him is the Planet of the Apes movies.
those are great. The Lost score is great. The Mission Impossible 3 score is great. And I think he did them up until recently. Um, but his early stuff when he's with Lost and moving after that, and he had a very,
Even with Pixar, right? Like
yeah, he
Up
did a
and
lot of
stuff like
Pixar
that.
stuff. Now he's just in bed with Disney and he does a lot of Disney stuff, which is like
He's
fine,
just
but
spreading himself so thin that it's almost like what, again, it's like Danny Elfman. It's like Danny Elfman kind of lost what made him after or around that time, where it's like that kind of like early punk rock kind of sensibility kind of was diluted over time, and I almost feel like Giacchino is just kind of, taking on maybe too many projects, and it's like it's just a shame that it's like there are so many other
composers.
composers out there, right, that it's like they could add something to the film, and it could sound unique and kind of give something a little bit more. And I'm not saying that it's not a bad score, it's just it's not memorable
Yeah.
in any real way.
I absolutely agree because I feel like, took off with Lost, I feel like, and then he started doing film scores. Like he did, The Incredibles, and which I guess was his first big movie score. But then after Mission Impossible 3, that's when he did Ratatouille, Cloverfield, Speed Racer, Star Trek, Up, Land of the Lost, Let Me In, Cars 2, Super 8, 50/50, Ghost Protocol, John Carter, Into Darkness, Star Trek Into Darkness, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Jupiter Ascending, Tomorrowland, Jurassic World, Inside Out, Zootopia, Star Trek Beyond, Doctor Strange, Rogue One, The Book of Henry,
Okay.
Spider-Man Homecoming, War for the Planet of the Apes, Coco, Incredibles 2, Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, Bad Times at the El Royale, Far From Home, Jojo Rabbit, American Pickle, Extinct, Let Him Go, Spider-Man No Way Home, and then next year he has The Batman, another superhero,
Yeah.
another iconic superhero. We just talked about Batman and Spider-Man, Jurassic World again, and then Thor: Love and Thunder, another new superhero that he's doing. So I'm with you. Like I love Michael Giacchino, but when I heard him get announced for Thor: Love and Thunder, and even in the Spider-Man movie, I'm excited to see it a second time because I'll pay more attention to things like the score and different things like that because I don't have to be like what's coming next. But Mark Mothersbaugh, right?
Yeah.
Did the score for Thor Ragnarok, and I love his scores that he does with Phil Lord and Chris Miller. I think he has a
Wes
very,
Anderson back in
Wes
the
Anderson,
day.
yeah, like his synthy kind of fun sound to it. Like I really like his sound, and he is one of those guys that brings something unique to a score. So when you go, oh, now I get that YTT worked with him on Jojo Rabbit, so he must have liked working with him, so he brought him back. But I'm like, fucking Giacchino, like I love him. I think he's great. But like I'm like, he's done like 3 other Marvel heroes already, and he's doing the Batman, and he's done Jurassic Park and Star Wars, and I'm uh like which are both John Williams, iconic properties. Like
Yeah.
and I get that that's who he's maybe kind of imitating a little bit at times, but
But
even
there's more
then,
people outside of Hans Zimmer and Giacchino, and even, I mean, as much as I'm still completely down with Trent Reznor and
oh
Atticus Ross.
yeah,
It's just like,
they're kind of even
yeah,
getting a little. No, I still love them. Get
I
them
do,
to do a
but
superhero
but I'm
movie.
still worried that it's like, okay, we need something that's like slightly, even with Johnny Greenwood, it's like
He
we
had
need
3 movies
something.
this year, right?
Yeah,
So
we need something like slightly unsettling, or kind of that sounds, disjointed in some way. Okay, well, let's get, Reznor and Ross, or Johnny Greenwood. And like, it's just a shame that, like, when it comes to productions choosing composers, that it seems like it's like 5 or 6 people, and then every now and then Mika Levy will do something. Jay Wadley actually did the score for Swan Song, the Mahershala Ali movie
you can
that's
check
on
out the
Apple.
conversation we did with him right on this channel. Just go
Yeah,
back a
for I'm
little bit.
Thinking of Ending Things, which was really good. Like, again, not a lot in terms of like original stuff, but
Yeah, I
where
like
it,
people like that. Give those guys a shot, right? Like
yeah.
bring in other people with unique sounds. I don't want to end on a negative note because obviously we're very positive. We've done 2 hours and 45 minutes
Now it's
of
longer than the movie.
and Giacchino's great and his score is good here. I gotta go back and listen to it again. I can't wait till it's available somewhere. Anyways, uh if you guys couldn't tell, love the MCU, love Spider-Man. Can't wait to see where it goes next. We'll continue composer talk on the main show or something like that, or maybe have a separate conversation about who are the best composers working today and who we would like to see on different things. Because yeah, Elfman, a legend, but if you look at what he's done recently, I was like, oh my god, he did that movie.
Oh, I mean, the 50 Shades films are the ones that are most telling.
Yeah.
He's doing it for the paycheck now.
Thank you all for listening. Let us know what you think of Spider-Man No Way Home, either on the comments right here on YouTube or send us a tweet. We'll plug those later, or go to our letterboxd and let us know there, which is Untitled_movies. That's probably your best one-stop shop for everything. If you want conversations, reviews, the main show, that's all posted over on Letterboxd. So head over there. We have a ton of other reviews that you guys can check out. I know you just listened to 2 hours and 45 minutes of Spider-Man. If you want another 45 minutes, you can go listen to our spoiler-free review, which maybe you already have, and thank you if you have. But we will also have reviews up. We have one up right now for Don't Look Up, the Adam McKay film. So go check that out. Benedetta, The Kingsman should be up pretty soon. The Lost Daughter, Nightmare Alley, Red Rocket, Being the Ricardos, Licorice Pizza, Tragedy of Macbeth, The Matrix Resurrections, The Tender Bar, and more. So lots and lots of content filling up the rest of the year. I think that's it. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com. And you can follow me on all the social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Uncle Eric. You can follow
Peter.
you...
That's a Nick Scarpino thing. Go listen to their in-review series.
You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Peter, it's me, Flint Marco.